Haley Gabbard was born on December 3, 1996, and lived an extraordinary life during her 20 years. Known for her maturity and natural caregiving instincts, she took on a maternal role among her friends. One friend recalled how she stood out not only because of her height, but also for her caring nature. It was no surprise when she chose a career in nursing at the University of Southern Indiana, aligning with her desire to help others. Haley was also incredibly self-sufficient. In high school, she worked at Donut Bank in Newburgh, and during college, she took a job at Texas Roadhouse, a local restaurant, to support herself financially. But work was more than just an income source. It was where she built a close-knit group of friends, many of whom she had known since high school. This tight group, known as the Radies, spent a lot of time together celebrating birthdays and creating cherished memories. However, it was possible that someone from Haley's trusted circle might have harmed her. For her family, there was one person in particular who raised concerns. Haley's mother revealed to detectives that her daughter had recently been in a tense situation with one of her friends, a revelation that surprised investigators. Haley was the godmother to 10-month-old Jackson, the son of her longtime friend Jordan Hughes. Haley adored being a godmother, relishing the opportunity to spend time with a baby without having to raise one herself. With Jackson's father out of the picture and Jordan working hard to support her family, the baby was often cared for by Jordan's boyfriend. He took on the role of father figure and was also a friend of Haley's and other members of their group. However, just days before Haley's murder, on April 10, 2017, a tragic accident occurred. While Jordan's boyfriend had Jackson in a car seat, he reportedly tripped over a diaper bag, causing the baby to fall down the stairs at their apartment. Jackson was rushed to the hospital and was in critical condition. Upon hearing the news, Haley and her friends hurried to the hospital to support Jordan. They brought her food and comforted her during the difficult time. Later, they returned to Haley's home to grab clean clothes, but something unusual caught their attention. As soon as they entered, they noticed the diaper bag sitting beside the couch, contradicting Jordan's boyfriend claim that it had caused him to trip and fall down the stairs. This discovery led the group to suspect that the man might have been hiding something. While many still embraced him, they couldn't shake their growing distrust, particularly because of his bad reputation in town and previous run-ins with the law. The tragic incident with Jackson only intensified their suspicions. Sadly, Jackson did not survive the fall, passing away after 2 days in intensive care. During police questioning, Jordan's boyfriend's inconsistent version of events raised further doubts, especially since Jackson's injuries didn't align with the type of fall that he had described. Haley was torn about what to do. She debated whether to share her suspicions with the police. She had even mentioned to friends that if the police wanted to talk to her, she would be willing. In fact, the police had spoken to her just days before her murder. If she had revealed or was about to reveal something that could implicate Jordan's boyfriend, it would have provided a strong motive for him to harm her. There were additional circumstances that heightened suspicion surrounding him. When detectives interviewed Haley's co-workers at the restaurant, they learned that on Sunday, April 23, 2017, after finishing her shift, Haley had been invited out for drinks with friends but declined. Instead, she planned to go to the library with a friend. However, those plans changed when she decided to visit Jordan to pick up her wallet. At the time, Jordan was at his boyfriend's brother's house. This location became the last known place where Haley was before her body was found. These events triggered alarm bells for both Haley's mother and the detectives. With such serious charges looming over Jordan's boyfriend, whose name was Thaddeus Rice, he had both the motive and the opportunity to commit the crime. Adding to the suspicion, the day after Haley's tragic death, her mother received a Snapchat video showing Rice brandishing a firearm. The disturbing footage intensified concerns about his potential involvement. Social media also buzzed with rumors implicating Rice in Haley's murder. With all these incriminating pieces falling into place, investigators were closing in on Thaddeus Rice and knew it was time to question him. However, when interrogated, Rice invoked his right to remain silent and requested legal representation, deepening suspicions about his involvement. His refusal to cooperate only made the detectives more wary. Jordan provided an alibi for Rice, stating that both of them had spent the night at Rice's brother's house, but the detectives weren't convinced they were any closer to making an arrest. With little physical evidence to go on, Haley's family was left grieving as they began the painful process of preparing for her funeral. Heather couldn't shake the anxiety that the person who killed her daughter might even show up at the candlelight vigil being held in her honor. However, the vigil also gave investigators a chance to observe everyone in attendance, hoping to catch any suspicious behavior. Despite these efforts, the case seemed to be stalling. Then, a call came in from one of Haley's closest friends, another member of the Radies. He recounted his activities from the night of April 23rd, explaining that after work, he spent time with another coworker. Later, he received a text from Haley asking him to come by her apartment. After a brief visit, Haley asked him to drop her off at Newburgh Docks, a local landmark just a few miles from the soccer field where her body was later found. Concerned but not wanting to pry, he obliged and left without questioning her further. He tried to reach her by text that night but received no response. This information gave detectives a clearer timeline of Haley's movements the night of her murder. They turned their focus to another friend, Jack, who lived near the Newburgh Docks. Jack added that Haley had planned to meet someone that evening. Despite searching Jack's home, investigators found no evidence linking him to the crime. Surveillance footage from a nearby Walmart also corroborated both men's alibi, leaving detectives without sufficient evidence to move forward. As the investigation grew more complex, the police discovered another potential lead. A Texas Roadhouse employee had reportedly dropped off blood-stained clothing at a local dry cleaner. Investigators immediately began looking into who this person was and whether they could be connected to the case. The clothing in question belonged to James Wetson, a cook at the restaurant. When detectives questioned James, who usually kept to himself at work, he provided a straightforward explanation for the blood, stating that he had cut himself earlier that week. Detectives then took DNA swabs from James and sent them, along with the clothing, to the lab. Unfortunately for the detectives, the results brought no new leads. The clothing only contained James's DNA, confirming his story and clearing him as a suspect. With the third suspect eliminated, investigators continued to focus on the remaining two suspects, even enlisting help from the FBI. Then, an unexpected twist changed everything. Nearly a week after Haley's murder on April 29, 2017, the FBI made a significant breakthrough. While Haley's cell phone remained missing, they had managed to retrieve her call records. Investigators were eager to know about her last phone activity, so they began tracking the phone's location to create a rough timeline. Their next step was to figure out who Haley had been communicating with. The call logs revealed a startling discovery. Haley had been in contact with Isaiah Hagen. This revelation prompted detectives to pull Isaiah's phone records as well, and what they uncovered was shocking. Isaiah's movements mirrored Haley's. According to the phone activity, Isaiah met with Haley at her apartment around 10:30 p.m. on April 23, 2017. Together, they traveled east of Evansville, arriving at the soccer field around 11 p.m. This directly contradicted Isaiah's previous statement to the police, where he claimed to have dropped Haley off at a different location. Haley's phone went offline at the soccer complex around 11:25 p.m., Around the same time, Isaiah's phone also left the area. Interestingly, Haley's phone briefly reappeared near southwest Evansville at around 3 a.m., but shut off again after 20 minutes, never to be turned on again. With conflicting stories, detectives turned to surveillance footage from Haley's apartment. The footage showed Haley getting into a car with Isaiah, but when he returned in the early morning to check Haley's car, he was alone. But detectives had more than just location data and surveillance footage to aid their investigation. Typically, text messages aren't fully available. Only a record of them being sent remains. However, in this case, they were able to retrieve the actual contents of the messages, and Isaiah's texts were damning. It turned out that Isaiah had a history of bouncing checks, with his father having to bail him out financially. On the night of Haley's murder, Isaiah had been texting his father about the money he owed while he was at the soccer field. Sadly, Isaiah's father wasn't aware of the full extent of his son's sinister plan to get the money back. Detectives discovered that Isaiah had resorted to various means to make ends meet. He had been stealing from his roommates and pawning their belongings at local shops. Eventually, his roommate kicked him out. Furthermore, Isaiah owed Haley $600, money she had lent him to cover his rent shortly before her murder. Additionally, he had forged 2 checks from her checkbook, each for $300, one of which bounced due to insufficient funds. Haley had confided in her friends about the stolen checks, even showing them an image of the check made out to Isaiah for $300 worth of groceries. Despite being understandably upset, Haley's compassionate nature led her to forgive him, and their friendship endured. Whether money was the motive that turned Isaiah from a petty thief into a cold-blooded killer on the night of April 23, 2017, remained uncertain. Ironically, the individual who had initially appeared as a concerned friend had now become the prime suspect. To gather more evidence, detectives obtained a warrant to search Isaiah's residence. He lived with his parents, who were speechless when detectives informed them that their son was a suspect in the murder of Haley. According to his parents, Isaiah had always been well-behaved, shy, kind, happy, easygoing, and eager to please. Everyone loved him. They insisted that Isaiah had been devastated by Haley's death, describing how he collapsed on the floor, consumed by grief. They also claimed they were unaware of Isaiah's financial struggles and found it unimaginable that he could resort to murder for money. However, the evidence told a different story. During the search, detectives found that Isaiah's father owned several firearms. The Hagans confirmed that a pistol was missing from their home, but couldn't explain how it had disappeared. The search continued, and detectives uncovered even more incriminating evidence. A towel that closely resembled the one found at the scene where Haley's body was discovered. The evidence seemed convincing enough for authorities to bring Isaiah in for a formal interrogation. The police had him sit down and informed him that they needed to talk, signaling that the investigation had taken a serious turn. Initially, Isaiah stuck to the same story he had told earlier. He had picked Haley up from her apartment and dropped her off near the dam where she was supposed to meet someone. He claimed he wasn't sure if this had happened on Friday or Saturday, recounting how Haley had assured him she was fine when he left. That's when detectives confronted Isaiah with the cell phone data evidence. They showed him a video illustrating the movements of both his and Haley's phones on a map of the area around the soccer complex, highlighting the timeline of events. Faced with this undeniable evidence, Isaiah's story began to change. He admitted to taking Haley to the soccer field but insisted that he left her there with all her belongings intact. Yet, even this version didn't align with the location data. Isaiah claimed that the only explanation he could think of was that Haley's phone had somehow stayed in his car. Ultimately, he admitted to having Haley's phone with him all night. He said he threw it out of his car window the following morning because he feared getting into trouble if anyone found it on him. He explained that this was why he had kept quiet earlier, apologizing and stating that he omitted the information out of fear. When asked why he was in Haley's car in the early hours of April 24th, he explained that Haley had given him cash and asked him to sell some concert tickets she had. She had also handed over her keys, including those for her car and apartment, so he could retrieve the tickets. Following her instructions, Isaiah said he went to Haley's apartment, searched her car for the tickets, and then entered her apartment, where he found them. He then specified the area where he had discarded the phone. Still, he did not confess to killing Haley, maintaining that he would never hurt her. But detectives weren't swayed by his denials, convinced they had the right man. With the evidence against Isaiah mounting, he was charged with murder, robbery, and obstruction of justice. As Isaiah became the primary suspect, the other two suspects were exonerated. Soon, he was behind bars, awaiting trial. After a mistrial in the first case, Isaiah's second trial began on May 30th, 2018. The prosecutor acknowledged that the case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, but he pointed to Isaiah's lies, evident in the interrogation tapes, as damning proof of his guilt. While defense attorney conceded that Isaiah had lied about certain details, he took a different approach. He emphasized that Isaiah never confessed to the murder and that no physical evidence linked him to the crime. He even suggested an alternative suspect, arguing that the authorities should have focused more on Rice, who had since been charged with the murder of baby Jackson. The defense also noted that phone data placed Isaiah miles away from the soccer field when Haley's phone became active around 3 a.m., showing that he couldn't have been near the same cell tower as Haley. Despite this, the prosecution offered another theory. When a phone is turned back on, it reconnects to the last cell tower it was connected to before being powered off. This, they suggested, explained why it seemed like Haley's phone had been moving. Although this was just a theory, detectives remained convinced that no one else was involved besides Isaiah Hagan. Then, a key development emerged during the trial. The prosecution called Isaiah's mother to the stand, and she made a shocking revelation. She testified that while Isaiah was in custody, he had confessed to her that he killed Haley accidentally and didn't mean to murder her. The prosecutor expressed strong confidence in her testimony, asserting that he had never had more faith in someone's words than in those of a mother willing to testify against her own son. This unexpected testimony gave the prosecution a significant advantage. However, the defense wasn't ready to concede, arguing that Isaiah's mother's testimony couldn't be trusted due to her personal motivations. During cross-examination, she admitted that she believed the jury wouldn't convict Isaiah of murder if they heard him say it was an accident. The prosecution countered this by questioning whether she, as a corrections officer, would resort to such tactics to protect her son. After hearing all the evidence, the jury delivered their verdict on June 25, 2018, finding Isaiah guilty. On August 2, 2018, 23-year-old Isaiah Hagan was sentenced to 60 years in prison. While some sense of justice was achieved, the outcome was still a painful reminder of the tragedy and a void that would forever linger in the hearts of those who cherished Haley. On December 13, 1980, Carrie Nelson, a resident of the small American town of Luverne, Minnesota, was born to loving parents, had a younger sister, and many friends. She was a sensitive and kind girl, always trying to help her loved ones and very empathetic towards others' problems. After graduating from her local high school, Carrie attended college in the neighboring state of North Dakota. Her dream was to become a doctor to help people. It was there that she met a boy named Mike Kellen, and after some time, the couple got engaged. Carrie balanced her university studies with a part-time job at Blue Mound State Park, close to her hometown. Her duties included selling tickets for the park and guiding guests who came for camping, hiking, or wildlife viewing. Carrie had been working there for her second consecutive season and was passionate about the place. The job was straightforward, and it also allowed her to spend a lot of time in nature, enjoying the picturesque landscapes. On May 20, 2001, Carrie went to work as usual. That day, only one other girl named Rebecca, who was an intern, was working at the park. In addition to her primary responsibilities, Carrie was tasked with training Rebecca and familiarizing her with the workflow. Carrie's shift started at 8:00 a.m. and was supposed to end at 3:30 p.m. She spent most of the day with Rebecca, explaining the details of the job. Around 12:45 p.m., Rebecca went to the office building located at the other end of the park, while Carrie stayed in a small room at the entrance. Rebecca returned around 2:30 p.m., entering the building through the back door, where she discovered a horrifying scene. Carrie was lying on the floor motionless, with a pool of blood near her head. At approximately the same time, Rebecca heard the front door open, and fearing it could be the same person who attacked her colleague, ran out the back door and headed home. Rebecca lived in a house within the park because her father was the park manager, so she reached it quickly. She informed her parents about the incident, and her father rushed to the scene while her mother called the police. The father reached the building and found no one but Carrie. He tried to find her pulse and realized she was dead. After that, he closed the curtains, locked the front door, and called 911. Around the same time, another call was made to the police. It turned out that when Rebecca discovered her colleague's body, a park visitor had entered, not the attacker. The woman went to the reception area, saw Carrie's body next to the pool of blood, then returned to her car and also called 911. The police arrived at the scene and began their investigation. Carrie's body was found behind the counter, where the telephones and cash register were located, and there were scattered objects and papers around. The handset of one of the phones was dangling from the table, and the plastic pen from Carrie's chair was broken with its pieces scattered on the floor. Based on this, the police inferred that there had been a struggle between the victim and the attacker. After speaking with the administrators, the investigators learned that 2 bank bags intended for storing money from the building were missing. Moreover, the unknown thief had taken cash from the cash register, totaling approximately $2,000 in stolen money. On the floor, the detectives found several clues: a man's wristwatch with a broken strap and a pack of cigarettes. Considering that Carrie did not smoke, the police assumed the cigarettes were left by the killer. As for the watch, they speculated that Carrie might have torn it off the attacker's wrist during the struggle. They also found large orange stone particles on the floor. The park manager told investigators that these particles likely came from a decorative stone with the park's name on it that was located in the reception area. The officers searched all the rooms but could not find the suspect. Given that there was blood spatter on the walls and ceiling of the room, they assumed that this stone had been used as the murder weapon. Meanwhile, their colleagues blocked the road leading to the park's entrance and began questioning all visitors. A couple who was camping reported that around 2:30 p.m., a white car with a brown vinyl roof sped past them. Unfortunately, they could not recall the make or the license plate of the vehicle. The detectives' investigation was complicated by the absence of surveillance cameras in the park, as crimes were extremely rare there. The only clues available were a wristwatch, a pack of cigarettes, and the vague testimonies of witnesses. Medical examiners inspected the victim's body and concluded that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head with a heavy object. They suspected that the offender might have used a large decorative stone, but this theory could only be definitively confirmed after its discovery. According to the detectives, Carrie's attack took place between 2:00 and 2:30 p.m. at the young woman's workplace. They found a love letter she had written to her boyfriend. In it, Carrie expressed her eager anticipation for their wedding and her desire to have 2 children. She dated the letter at 2:00 p.m. Another interesting fact was that the man's watch found near the victim's body had stopped at 2:16 p.m., possibly because Carrie tore it from the wrist of her assailant. The police expanded the search throughout the park, and 5 days later, they found the decorative stone in a nearby stream. Apparently, the killer had taken it with them and thrown it into the stream from a bridge while driving. Medical experts compared the characteristics of the stone with the injuries to Carrie's head and confirmed it was the murder weapon. However, the water had washed away any fingerprints and DNA samples that the offender might have left behind. No further clues were found, and the police began to search for a potential suspect. They first suspected Carrie's boyfriend, but he had a solid alibi. At the time of the murder, he was at a funeral 110 kilometers away from the park. That day, around 3:00 p.m., he had tried to call Carrie on her work phone, not yet aware that his girlfriend had been killed. Investigating park employees, police learned that Carrie had been troubled by a 26-year-old coworker named Stephen, who persistently asked her out and whose advances she had rejected. Stephen, who also had a known drug habit and allegedly sold drugs to park visitors, became a person of interest. Stephen's alibi for the day of the murder, he claimed to be at his daughter's birthday party, didn't account for the entire time frame of Carrie's death, raising suspicions. Stephen owned a white Cadillac, aligning with the description of the vehicle seen speeding away from the park. Financial difficulties further suggested a motive for Stephen's potential involvement in the theft and possibly the murder, especially if he had discovered Carrie's intentions to report his drug-related activities. His vehicle was impounded, and a DNA sample was taken, but there was not enough evidence to conclusively link him to the crime. Despite collecting various DNA samples and fingerprints of the crime scene, none could be conclusively matched to Stephen or any other suspects, leaving the case unresolved. The investigators continued to pursue all leads, but with limited evidence and no further clues, the case went cold. At that time, DNA analysis technology had significantly advanced, allowing experts to re-examine the evidence. This time, they identified 3 distinct DNA profiles, one belonging to Carrie, another to an unknown male, and a third to an unknown female. These samples were run through the state database, but no matches were found. However, detectives remembered a significant detail. The pack of cigarettes found near Carrie's body had a unique tax stamp, indicating that it was purchased in South Dakota. They sent the DNA samples to their South Dakota counterparts and eventually made a breakthrough. Upon checking the South Dakota database, they found a match for the male DNA profile. The individual identified was Randy Swaney, a 35-year-old with a criminal record for serial theft, and who was, at the time, serving a 30-month sentence in a South Dakota prison. At the time of the murder, he had been out of jail. Police also found that he owned a light-colored Oldsmobile Delta, which matched the description given by witnesses. His fingerprints were found to match several prints at the crime scene. Despite this evidence, detectives aimed to gather as much proof as possible before charging him. With only a month left in his prison term, the police moved quickly, fearing he might flee upon release. They interviewed his wife, who was accustomed to her husband being under police scrutiny for thefts, but was shocked to hear about the murder suspicion. When shown a photo of the wristwatch found at the scene, she confirmed it belonged to Randy and said he sometimes wore it, leading investigators to believe the last DNA sample on the watch was his. They then informed her of their suspicion that her husband was involved in the murder. On April 19, detectives went to the prison to talk to Randy, but he declined to speak without a lawyer. After a failed interrogation attempt, Randy called his wife. The police, who recorded jail calls, overheard her upset and questioning what he had done. She was mainly concerned about her DNA being found on the wristwatch and fearful of being implicated in the crime. The wife cooperated with the police, providing her DNA sample, allowing them to search her home, and handing over photos of Randy. One photo showed him at the wheel of a white car, similar to the one described by witnesses. Another showed him wearing a wristwatch with a broken strap like the one found at the crime scene. She also confirmed that Randy smoked the same brand of cigarettes found near Carrie's body. All this evidence was sufficient to take the case to trial. Randy was charged on May 8, 2007, a day before his scheduled release. He was immediately transferred to a Minnesota jail, and the prosecution began preparing for trial. According to the prosecution's theory, Randy had initially targeted the park building as an easy robbery site due to the lack of cameras and security, but also the presence of cash. When he entered the building, Carrie may have been in another room. But as she returned and discovered the intrusion, Randy began to steal money from the cash register. She caught him in the act, which led to a struggle between them. Randy then threatened her to open the safe. After accessing the safe, he took a decorative stone and struck her over 5 times, fearing leaving a live witness. Even his relatives, including his wife, testified against him during the trial. They revealed that Randy regularly committed theft, abused illegal substances, and had serious gambling debts, constantly leading him into debt. His former cellmate recounted how Randy mentioned leaving his watch at the crime scene. Another inmate testified that after the police interviewed him in jail, Randy said, "This time they've caught me. I'm looking at life in prison." Randy's defense lawyers maintained his innocence, arguing that he had lost his watch prior to the incident and that the real killer had found and used it. However, this claim was in direct conflict with the DNA evidence found on the watch, which included genetic material from Randy, his wife, and Carrie. The accused claimed he had been fishing about 150 kilometers from the park on the day of the incident, but since he was supposedly alone, no one could corroborate his alibi. He also claimed that he had been in the park only once, long before the murder, which is when he acknowledged he might have left his fingerprints. However, all of the defense's arguments were outweighed by the solid evidence. The defense attorney tried to cast suspicion on others, including Carrie's boyfriend, insinuating he could be a real killer, but these suggestions did not align with the facts. The trial concluded on August 15, 2008. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Randy guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Despite this, he continued to assert his innocence and filed several appeals, all of which were denied. From the start, his defense relied on far-fetched theories that contradicted the DNA evidence and other substantial proof, leaving no chance for his case to be reconsidered. Molly Bish was born on August 2, 1983, in Warren, Massachusetts. She was the youngest of 3 children in the Bish family. With her siblings Heather and John Jr., Molly was a bright, responsible, and dearly loved and active girl. The Bish family originally hailed from Detroit, Michigan, but they moved to Massachusetts in search of a better future. The reason for their relocation was a disturbing crime that occurred in their Detroit neighborhood. A young woman had been kidnapped on her way home from work and later found murdered. The Bish couple thought Warren would be a much safer place to raise their children, and this seemed to hold true for the next 15 years. Molly, always seeking new activities, had taken a summer job as a lifeguard at Commons Pond in Warren. She was excited about this opportunity as it was her brother John Jr.'s former job, and he had requested that Molly be given the chance to continue in his place. Molly was fully committed to her job and wanted to perform it to the best of her ability to make her brother proud. On June 26, 2000, Magi accompanied Molly to the pond for her 7th day of work. When they arrived at the parking lot, Magi noticed a strange man. He was smoking the cigarette and sitting in a new white car. His presence made her uncomfortable. She looked at him, but he didn't acknowledge her. Magi accompanied Molly to her lifeguard station and stayed a little longer, hoping the man would be gone when she returned to the parking lot. However, when she got back to her vehicle, the stranger was still there. They locked eyes for several seconds, and fearing for Molly's safety, Magi waited inside her car for several minutes until the unknown man finally left. On June 27, 2000, Molly's 8th day on the job, she and her mother stopped at a local store just before 10 in the morning. Molly purchased everything she needed for her shift as a lifeguard. When they arrived at the isolated pond surrounded by mostly woods, Maid J dropped off her daughter, who hurried to her station since she was running a bit late. Molly arrived a few minutes later at her station and quickly set up her chair, towel, and all her work equipment just after 10 in the morning. Swimming lessons were scheduled to begin soon, and she wanted everything in order to welcome the children. The beach was officially open, but Molly was alone, and it seemed that everyone was running late that day. No houses overlooked the water, and the beach wasn't visible from the road, which was located at the end of a dead-end street. In all directions, there were only trees. At 10 in the morning, Sandra and her children arrived to set up camp, followed by other families. They looked around for Molly but couldn't find her at her workstation. That morning, Molly hadn't used her police radio, which was part of her daily routine. Besides the open first aid kit, there was nothing to indicate that she had been engaged in any activities there. Even her shoes were neatly placed in front of her chair. When swimming lessons ended, one of the parents contacted Park Commissioner to report that Molly had disappeared, as it was uncharacteristic of her to leave her workstation unattended. The Park Commissioner arrived at the beach shortly after 11 in the morning, and at 11:44, he used his two-way radio to inform the police that the young girl had not shown up. He also examined her personal belongings left at the scene. From that point onward, some irregular events occurred that raised suspicions. At some point between noon and the afternoon, he ran into John Jr. at a hardware store, and for an unknown reason, he didn't mention that Molly had disappeared. Another irregularity was that the police didn't contact Molly's mother until 1 in the afternoon, 3 hours after Magi had dropped her off at her new job. Part of the reason for the delay, according to some accounts, was that people thought Molly might have gotten a ride to visit a friend, which was a logical assumption considering she had left her belongings by her workstation. Alarmed after receiving the call about her daughter's absence, the mother hurried to the location, where she found Molly's sandals, chair, first aid kit, radio, and lunch by the shore. However, there was no sign of her. Hours later, after the scene of the disappearance, and any potential evidence had been trampled by beachgoers, children, dogs, and curious onlookers who roamed freely, the police realized that their initial assessments might have been wrong. The first theory that Molly had simply gone off with friends made sense for an ordinary teenager, but not for someone as responsible as she was. So the second theory gained strength, suggesting that Molly had drowned in the pond. At that moment, it seemed the most plausible explanation. It's worth noting that Warren was the kind of small town where nothing much happened, and there were no records of violent crimes. With its picturesque houses and natural beauty, it seemed like a safe place to raise a family. In fact, that was the reason the Bish couple had moved there in the first place. Police investigation began with the basics, analyzing the teenager's belongings and work tools, and something chilling occurred. The unknown man became a suspect because all witnesses saw how he touched and examined everything within his reach upon arriving at the disappearance scene, without gloves or care. May J informed officers that she had seen a mysterious man lurking around the pond in the days before. With this information, the county sheriff's office initiated an investigation. The local worker testified that he had seen the same man in the white sit-in, but he didn't see him in Molly's worksite parking lot. The car was parked near a nearby cemetery that was connected to the pond by a short path. On the morning of June 27, the day of Molly's disappearance, a truck was unloading sand for the beach. In the investigation, the truck driver was questioned, and he reported seeing the man parked in the lot a few minutes before Magi and Molly arrived. Police officers searched the pond and the surrounding woods but couldn't find Molly. Although there were no signs of a struggle at the scene, both the police and her family were convinced she had been abducted. The police focused their investigation on the unknown man in the white car, based on descriptions provided by Magi, and the two witnesses, A composite sketch of the man was created and circulated. He was described as a man with brown hair, dark eyes, and approximately 50 years old, possibly a heavy smoker since everyone who saw him mentioned he had a cigarette in hand. Simultaneously, a thorough investigation was launched, including the examination of local sex offenders to identify any matching the suspect's description, but no identification was made. The investigation into Molly's case became the largest and most costly search for a missing person ever conducted in the state of Massachusetts. The abduction gained significant notoriety and extensive media coverage. Following Molly's forced absence, her family created a website to spread awareness of the case to a broader audience. They also established an email chain to reach as many people as possible. Over 30,000 U.S. residents received emails about her disappearance. In 2001, Magi reached out to the renowned sketch artist, who agreed to create a composite sketch of Molly's abductor. The two met at a place, which are private accommodations in both rural and urban settings that offer bed and breakfast at rates lower than local hotels. They spent 9 hours chatting while they worked on the composite sketch. When it was completed, Magi felt it was accurate, except for one detail. She requested the artist to update the drawing to include a cigarette in the man's hand. The next day, when the artist showed her the updated result, Maggie was certain that the composite sketch was identical to the man she had seen. In May 2003, a hunter reported finding a blue swimsuit. He contacted the police because he had seen information about Molly's case and knew that she had been wearing a blue swimsuit when she disappeared. This lead turned out to be of great significance, and an intensive search in the forest began immediately. Tracking efforts, involving experts of various kinds, continued for several years. Finally, on June 9, 2003, Molly's body was discovered a little over 8 kilometers from her home. The official cause of death was not disclosed, but it was known that she had been murdered and buried in the dense vegetation on Whiskey Hill. The police continued their relentless efforts to find the person responsible, not just for the kidnapping, but for Molly's homicide. However, the case quickly went cold. In 2005, a man with a striking resemblance to the composite sketch was considered a suspect in an attempted kidnapping, but he couldn't be linked to Molly's case. In 2007, a registered sex offender was identified after attempting to abduct and assault a jogger just a few kilometers from Warren. He also matched the description of the suspect, but the police didn't press charges, and the reasons were never made public. In 2009, Rodney Stanger, who had recently been convicted of murder, became the prime suspect in Molly's abduction and murder. He had lived just a few kilometers from the town where Molly resided and moved to Florida shortly after her disappearance. Rodney also drove a white car, frequently fished at Commons Pond, and was an avid hunter in the area where Molly's body was found. He also fit the description that Molly's mother had provided to the police of the man she saw in a white sit-in. However, Rodney was never charged in the case as the police couldn't establish beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the perpetrator. After this significant setback, the case went cold once again. In November 2011, a confidential informant, who had been providing information to the Special Operations Group, became the new suspect. The individual identified as Gerald Battistoni attempted suicide while in prison after learning that he was considered a person of interest in Molly's case. Gerald also lived in the area where the teenager disappeared and had an extensive criminal record dating back to the 1980s. His DNA was analyzed in Texas, where he was serving his sentence, but the man passed away in November 2014 and was not charged with the crime. In June 2016, it was announced that enhanced DNA testing would be applied to 24 samples that had not yet been analyzed. A year later, in June 2017, investigators claimed to have found compelling information in the case. This information led them to a campground where the car allegedly used in Molly's abduction was supposedly buried. Multiple areas of interest were identified using ground-penetrating radar. The information was related to a new suspect who had lived at the campground around the time of Molly's abduction. At that time, he owned a white car similar to the one seen in the pond's parking lot. A witness stated that the man had told him something bad had happened and that he had been in the woods all night when Molly disappeared. He also reportedly had bloodshot scratches on his face. However, the man denied any involvement in the case, and it's unclear whether anything incriminating was found during the 2017 search. In 2019, new tests were conducted using more advanced technology in the hope of obtaining additional data to analyze the case's evidence. Investigators were hopeful that they could obtain a DNA profile with the new procedures, but the wheels of justice would once again turn slowly for Molly. On June 3, 2021, Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early announced that Francis P. Sumner Sr. was a new person of interest in the case. According to reports at the time, it was not possible to arrest him because he had been found dead in his home 5 years earlier. However, the police received a verifiable lead that Francis was involved in Molly's disappearance. Because the investigation is still ongoing, authorities cannot provide many details about the case against Francis, but his criminal history is part of the reason he became a suspect. He had amassed a long list of crimes during his life and had served concurrent sentences for multiple abuses against women in the area where Molly worked. Police had received several tips about him over the years, and this time, the information given in the tips could be corroborated and verified. Francis had been convicted of kidnapping and raping a young woman who had gone to his auto repair shop in 1981. He was released on parole in 1998, just 2 years before Molly's disappearance. He lived not far from where Molly disappeared. He also resembled the composite sketch of the suspect. Unfortunately, he died in 2016 without facing charges in the case. Investigators continue to seek more information about him. When the existence of a new suspect was announced, the Bish family granted several interviews. Molly's older sister, Heather, told a media outlet that she believed investigators were doing everything possible with the information about the new suspect. As part of the effort to determine Francis's involvement, the police went to Ohio to obtain a DNA sample from his son, who was serving a federal prison sentence. This would enable them to conduct DNA analysis to establish a match with the deceased offender. Heather stated that someone like Francis, a convicted sex offender and rapist, should have been on the sex offender registry. This would have allowed them to approach him in the early stages of the investigation, and perhaps the case could have been closed with less trauma for everyone involved. In the same interview, Molly's sister pointed out that the conclusion of the investigation, which has spanned decades, would bring peace to her family. While they will always miss Molly, at least they won't have to keep trying to figure out who was responsible for her absence. Molly Bish's disappearance sparked the largest search for a missing person in the history of the state of Massachusetts. As of 2023, the case remains unresolved. The family believes they are nearing the end of the search for the culprit, although they are also aware that there is a very high likelihood that there may never be complete closure. Her killer has not yet been apprehended, but the case remains open, and the investigation is ongoing. A reward of $100,000 is still being offered for information leading to a definitive resolution. Molly's disappearance has turned her parents into staunch advocates for child safety. They hope that through their efforts, they can prevent other children from becoming victims of predators. Born on April 8, 1974, in the heart of Odessa, Texas, Christopher Kyle grew up as the oldest child in a family deeply rooted in Catholic values and a love for rural life. His childhood was spent in the vast Texan fields, where he embraced activities like playing to be a cowboy and caring for livestock. On his 8th birthday, Christopher received a quintessentially Texan gift from his father, a Springfield rifle, a model highly esteemed by the American military for its superior build and reliability since its introduction by Winchester in 1906. This rifle not only continued to be a military staple until the late 1970s, but also gained fame among gun enthusiasts. Christopher cherished this gift, Under his father's guidance, he learned the intricacies of firearm maintenance, handling, and marksmanship, quickly applying his skills to hunting small animals like turkeys. Observing his son's growing passion for hunting and firearms, his father gifted him a shotgun, which Christopher later used for deer hunting with his brother. Graduating from high school in 1992, Christopher set his sights on a career in bronco rodeo, an endeavor that involves mastering the art of horseback riding in rodeo events. He aspired to balance this profession with studying ranch and livestock management in college. True to his Texan roots, Christopher showed great promise, but a severe arm injury from a horse riding accident forced him to undergo reconstructive surgery, effectively ending his rodeo ambitions. With his cowboy dreams behind him, Christopher sought new paths. His affinity for hunting and shooting, combined with a deep sense of patriotism, guided him towards a military career. Initially considering the Navy, Christopher's encounter with a recruiter who recognized his unique skill set led to a pivotal decision: to apply for the Navy SEALs, the U.S. Navy's elite special operations force known for their rigorous selection process and deployment in diverse missions such as direct action operations, reconnaissance, unconventional warfare, hostage rescue, and counterterrorism. The SEALs training prepares them to excel in any environment, from sea to land and sky, and is a challenge that few can meet, as Christopher would soon discover. Christopher Kyle's innate modesty was such that his superiors had to persuade him that he indeed possessed skills befitting a Navy SEAL. Embracing this new challenge, Christopher embarked on a journey to meet the stringent requirements of the SEALs. His determination bore fruit, and at 24, he enlisted on August 5, 1998. The following year marked the beginning of his rigorous training, where he refined his military skills. Despite his dedication and preparedness, Christopher's initial application to join the SEALs was rejected, not for a lack of skill or discipline, but due to a previous arm surgery. Yet, Christopher and those who knew him were convinced of his potential to excel as a Navy SEAL. Recognizing his unique abilities, he was invited the next year to undertake a demanding 24-week course named Basic Underwater Demolition, Sea, Air, Land Training at Coronado, California. In March 2001, he successfully completed this specialized training, earning his place in Class 233 as a Special Operations Soldier at the Coronado base. That year, Christopher's personal life flourished alongside his professional achievements. He met Taya, a woman whose striking black hair and intense gaze immediately captivated him. Their connection was instant, leading to a marriage in 2002, with Taya adopting the surname Kyle. Together, they would go on to have 2 children. At this point, Christopher's life was thriving both personally and professionally, having achieved his dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. Fueled by his unwithering patriotism, he aspired to contribute further to his country by participating in the Navy SEALs' most challenging operations, reserved for the highest-ranking and most skilled soldiers. Christopher's aspirations materialized when, after completing his training, his team was chosen as one of the first to be deployed in a significant and tumultuous conflict, the initial U.S. invasion of Iraq, which eventually escalated into the Iraq War. The call to action for his platoon came at the start of 2003. On this battleground, Christopher would carve his place in history, showcasing his exceptional abilities and determination, earning the admiration of his peers, superiors, and ultimately, recognition as an American hero for his contributions and bravery in a challenging and pivotal period. Throughout his military training, Christopher dedicated himself to mastering a variety of military rifles, learning the intricacies of each to determine. Christopher held a particular fondness for the Winchester Magnum sniper rifle, stating it was the only one he valued as highly as the Springfield his father had gifted him. His exceptional marksmanship, honed through years of amateur hunting, led to his role as a support sniper in his platoon, responsible for reconnaissance and troop deployment. In this crucial position, he was entrusted with the safety and lives of many. During the U.S. invasion of Iraq, Christopher's unit was among the first to arrive at the onset of Operation Iraqi Freedom in March 2003. By the end of the month, they had established their position in a small town near Nasiriyah. As they awaited Marine reinforcements, Christopher and his fellow soldiers maintained vigilance from a building's vantage point, while most local residents remained indoors. Observing the American soldiers cautiously, a woman with several children approached the soldiers on the street. Suddenly, she reached into her bag, pulling out a yellowish object, seemingly ignoring the children. "It's a grenade. Shoot," commanded Christopher's superior from their lookout. Hesitant at first, Christopher complied with the repeated order and fired twice. This harrowing moment marked the first time he had to make such a grave decision, taking a life that was neither that of a combatant nor a man, profoundly impacting his perspective on the realities of war. In time, Christopher documented his military experiences, particularly grappling with the deep-seated animosity towards the enemy that developed from that first encounter and intensified throughout his tours in Iraq. "I deeply despise the malevolence that woman harbored. My loathing for her persists. It was an obligation I had to fulfill. I harbored no regret. My actions safeguarded numerous American lives, which undoubtedly held greater value than hers," he expressed in his writings, reflecting on the complexities and moral dilemmas faced in the line of duty. In the wake of his initial exposure to war, Christopher consistently established himself as a proficient and dependable sniper. His acts of valor in various operations were widely talked about among his fellow soldiers, and his reputation for bravery began to gain recognition among higher-ranking officers. After his initial mission, Christopher returned 3 additional times to Iraq, each time playing a vital role in his platoon and successfully completing numerous missions. His repeated deployments were notable, especially considering the challenging nature of his first experience in combat. Unlike many who were reluctant to return to the battlefield, Christopher went back several times, driven not by a fondness for war, but by his deep love and sense of duty towards his country. This commitment was particularly poignant considering the still fresh memories of the September 11 attacks. Among the many feats in his career, one particular instance stood out where Christopher accomplished what was arguably one of the most remarkable sniper shots recorded in military history. During a mission in Baghdad, he and his team managed to locate and eliminate a hostile target who had been attacking and evading their platoon. The extraordinary aspect of this shot was its distance, approximately 2 kilometers away, a testament to his exceptional ability. In line with military protocol, after each combat mission, Christopher was required to submit detailed reports of his actions and the outcomes, including the enemy casualties he was responsible for. These reports, however, only accounted for confirmed kills, as verification required corroboration by another soldier. Despite this, the unconfirmed kills were not insignificant in number. From an official standpoint, the Pentagon acknowledged over 150 enemy deaths in Christopher's military record. Nevertheless, Christopher himself estimated that the actual number of fatalities he caused ranged between 250 and 300, spanning the 4 deployments in Iraq from 2003 to 2009. "I have been credited by the Navy for more sniper kills than any other American service member, past or present. The actual count varies. One day it's 160. Another day it might be more or less. The true figure, that's something you might need to ask the Navy for, and they might just tell you on a good day." Christopher reflected on his service record. The Pentagon and the military, as Christopher often pointed out, were typically reticent about divulging the full details of the events in Iraq. Consequently, many of the accounts of what transpired came from the soldiers themselves. One such account was shared by a former ranger who served in Iraq alongside Christopher. He recalled an incident where 2 Iraqi informants working for the U.S. were fleeing for their lives after being identified by Al-Qaeda operatives. As they neared Christopher's platoon, They were frantically signaling their dire situation. Contrary to expectations of an impending firefight, Christopher, assessing the situation, scaled a palm tree with his rifle. From this vantage point, he precisely eliminated 2 Al-Qaeda members with just 2 shots, causing the others to retreat, unsure of the origin of the deadly fire. Such incidents underscored Christopher's extraordinary marksmanship and the trust his comrades placed in him. Christopher often reminisced about another remarkable incident involving 2 Iraqi insurgents fleeing on a motorcycle. Displaying his exceptional skills, he calmly aimed and neutralized both with a single bullet from a considerable distance. This feat, while seemingly straightforward to those familiar with action movies or video games, is incredibly rare and demonstrates a profound understanding of both firearms and marksmanship. However, Christopher's experiences in Iraq were not without their share of trauma. On one occasion, while setting up an American guard post at the top of a building, they came under enemy fire from multiple directions. In the ensuing chaos, one of Christopher's teammates, operating an M60 machine gun, returned fire indiscriminately. Hostile shots struck the machine gun, causing it to malfunction and explode, sending shrapnel flying. This shrapnel severely injured Ryan, a fellow platoon member and close comrade of Christopher's, resulting in disfigurement and the loss of his eyesight. Despite surviving this incident and receiving commendations for his service, Ryan tragically passed away due to complications from subsequent reconstructive surgery. Following this harrowing event, Christopher and his platoon were forced to retreat to a nearby U.S. military outpost. Later, with reinforcements and armored infantry tanks, they returned to the original site. Upon their arrival, they were immediately met with a barrage of enemy fire. Christopher and a group of soldiers sought refuge in a nearby building, taking cover at the base of a staircase. Among them was Mark, a young soldier on his first deployment in Iraq. Under Christopher's command, tasked with ascending the stairs for reconnaissance, he was struck by a bullet as he turned to relay information to his team, dying instantly. In the heat of battle, his fellow soldiers, including Christopher, had to press on, facing the enemy while bearing the weight of their comrades' loss. Amidst the turmoil, Christopher and his platoon successfully secured the outpost. The day's events resulted in a single casualty within their ranks. Deeply impacting Christopher, the loss of his comrade not only intensified his animosity towards the enemy, but also left him grappling with a sense of despair. His wife later reflected on how he was continually tormented by memories of those he couldn't save, despite the numerous lives he had preserved. These harrowing experiences from the battlefield lingered with him, disturbing his sleep and mental peace for years to come. During his service, Christopher's reputation as a soldier of extraordinary capability flourished. His peers and superiors dubbed him the Legend or the Terminator, recognizing his unparalleled skill and effectiveness. Nevertheless, all chapters must close, and in 2009, Christopher made the decision to retire, stepping away from his role as a sniper. His decision was met with respect from the U.S. military, which honored him with an honorable discharge and multiple commendations, including 4 Bronze Stars and 2 Silver Stars for valor. Christopher's decision to retire stemmed from a desire to preserve his marriage and find peace with his family. Back home, he took on a new role as the president of a private company offering tactical and military training to both the U.S. military and other law enforcement agencies. In 2012, he seized the opportunity to share his journey as a Marine and Navy SEAL by penning his own book. The publication, titled American Sniper, resonated with the public's growing interest in the personal stories and challenges faced by military personnel. His autobiography quickly garnered widespread attention, elevating Christopher to the status of a national hero and a survivor of war's infernal trials. His media appearances, discussing his book and experiences, catapulted him to fame, with the book's sales skyrocketing, remaining on the New York Times bestseller list for 37 consecutive weeks. In one of his television interviews, Christopher revealed that at one point, every sniper casualty in Iraq was attributed to him, leading Iraqi insurgents to place a $20,000 bounty on his head. Despite the accolades and recognition, his story did not have a fairy tale ending. Suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, Christopher battled the invisible scars left by the war. He was haunted by insomnia and vivid nightmares, often feeling like he was being pursued by an unseen enemy. His commitment to helping fellow veterans led him to collaborate with a nonprofit organization, launching the Heroes Project. This initiative focused on providing comprehensive support to veterans, including gym facilities, personalized training programs, therapy, and assistance for those with combat-related disabilities and trauma. Unfortunately, it was his dedication to this cause that ultimately led to his tragic and untimely demise. Towards the end of 2013, Christopher was approached for assistance by a woman named whose younger daughter was a schoolmate of his children. She was familiar with Christopher's military background and his commitment to helping fellow veterans. She expressed concern about her son, Eddie Ray Routh, a 25-year-old Iraq war veteran battling post-traumatic stress disorder. Eddie's struggles were compounded by a schizophrenia diagnosis and frequent admissions to psychiatric facilities over the past 2 years. He had even expressed to his mother auditory hallucinations and suicidal thoughts. Eddie, born in September 1987, had harbored ambitions of joining the Marine Corps since his teenage years, a dream he realized after high school graduation. His deployment to Iraq in September 2007 placed him near Baghdad, where he served as a prison guard and weapons repairman for 6 months. He later participated in a humanitarian mission in Haiti in January 2010, before receiving an honorable discharge from the military the following year. Upon hearing Eddie's plight, Christopher reassured his mother, promising to engage her son in a calming activity and have a talk with him. Unbeknownst to his mother, Christopher's plan involved taking Eddie to a shooting range, an approach that had previously shown positive results with other veterans suffering from trauma. Yet, this choice of therapy would prove perilous with Eddie. On the fateful afternoon of February 2, 2013, Christopher, accompanied by a fellow former SEAL and close friend, 35-year-old Chad Littlefield, drove to Eddie's residence in his truck. Eddie joined them in the truck, exhibiting signs of unrest during the drive. Despite their apprehension, the two men continued to the Rough Creek Ranch shooting range in Texas. En route, Christopher texted Chad about Eddie's erratic behavior, prompting Chad to request vigilance for any potential threat. As they prepared for shooting at the range, Christopher and Chad, with their backs turned and unaware of the impending danger, were suddenly ambushed by Eddie. Seizing 2 pistols from the trunk of the truck, Eddie ruthlessly opened fire. Following the attack, Eddie took the keys to Christopher's truck and nonchalantly proceeded to buy burritos at a nearby Taco Bell. He then visited his sister's house, eerily admitting to driving a vehicle belonging to a deceased individual and recounting the events with a detached demeanor. Shocked and uncertain, his sister contacted the authorities, reporting the possibility of a delusional episode given Eddie's mental state. The events that unfolded were not a figment of imagination, but a stark and tragic reality. Chad Littlefield had been struck by 7 bullets, 4 of which were instantly fatal. One shot, located at the upper part of his head, indicated that Eddie had come dangerously close before firing, with the final shot likely delivered as Littlefield lay on the ground. Christopher Kyle suffered 6 gunshot wounds at close range, including a deadly one that penetrated his aorta, leading to immediate death. This heart-wrenching incident brought an abrupt and tragic end to the life of a hero who had dedicated himself to aiding fellow veterans in their post-war lives and had sought a tranquil existence with his family after his own turbulent experiences in combat. Before law enforcement could reach Eddie's sister's home to apprehend him, he had already departed, eventually heading to his own residence. There, local police intercepted and arrested him. During the arrest, Eddie was raving incoherently about apocalyptic themes, leading to his charge for capital murder. In the face of national shock and outrage, his bail was set at $3 million. The trial commenced in February 2015. During the trial, Eddie's defense team argued that he was in a state of insanity at the time of the murders. However, the prosecution's forensic psychologists cast doubt on this, suggesting Eddie might have been mimicking symptoms of schizophrenia and that his behavior could be attributed to a personality disorder exacerbated by drug misuse. The expert also suggested that his psychotic symptoms were more likely linked to substance abuse than to his wartime experiences. As a result, on February 24, 2015, following a 2-week trial, Eddie was convicted for the murders of Christopher Kyle and Chad Littlefield, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. When queried about his motives for the killings, Eddie chillingly responded that he had acted because the victims were communicating with him. In 2015, Christopher Kyle's life and legacy were further immortalized through a film directed by Clint Eastwood. Based on his autobiography, American Sniper, the film incorporated fictional elements for dramatic effect. This cinematic portrayal brought renewed attention to his remarkable story. In honor of his memory and service, Texas established February 2nd as Chris Kyle Day, a tribute to the American hero. The Whitaker family was a family like no other. The father, named Kent, owned a business in the construction area, which he had also inherited from his parents. It was a well-established business of several generations, doing very well economically. Patricia, the mother, was a school teacher, but decided to retire from work when she had her first child and dedicated herself to taking care of her son. Their first son, the eldest, was named Bart, and a couple of years later, they had another boy, Kevin. These 2 children were quite privileged. As their friends saw them, they were given everything they wanted, attended the best schools, and their house always seemed to be the place where everyone wanted to gather because they always had the latest toys and the latest movies. Their mother, Patricia, was always there taking care of them, and having been a school teacher, she had a lot of empathy with children, so the kids felt very happy at home. As money was never a problem for them, they focused more on their children doing what made them happy. What fulfilled them? Bart, the eldest son, shared his passion for cycling with his father from a very young age, which meant they spent a lot of time together, always fixing their bikes and going on rides. The relationship between the 2 brothers was also quite good, quite close, although everyone described them as polar opposites. The older brother, Bart, was more extroverted, more of a joker, somewhat more rebellious. Kevin, on the other hand, was much calmer. Everyone said he seemed more attached, more thoughtful, sensitive, and generally more considerate. This difference, instead of separating them, seemed to bring them closer together, complementing each other. Since both were quite popular with their respective groups of friends, there didn't appear to be any competition between them. Life for them seemed almost perfect. Their parents never fought, at least not in front of them. They had no major problems. Both children were well educated, well fed, and didn't suffer any violence or abuse at home. Their neighbors said they were the kind of family you set as an example for your own, the kind of family you aspire to have one day. In 2003, Bart, the eldest son of the Whitaker family, was 23, and his younger brother, Kevin, was 19. Both were university students. On December 10th, Bart excitedly called his parents. He had aced his final exams and was graduating with honors. Overjoyed, the family decided to dine out for a special dinner. They gathered at their home first, where Bart received a coveted Rolex watch as a graduation gift. The family then piled into the father's SUV and headed to Bart's favorite restaurant. The evening was filled with joy, captured in photographs taken by Bart's father, but the cheerful atmosphere was short-lived. Upon returning home, Kevin, the youngest, was the first to step out of the SUV and head towards the house. Just as he reached the stairs inside, he was shockingly shot in the chest. Patricia, standing in the doorway, was also shot in the chest. Kent, following behind, was hit in the arm, causing him to fall outside the house. Meanwhile, Bart, who had returned to the SUV for his cell phone, heard the gunshots. He hurried into the house and encountered an assailant in a balaclava, whom he believed to be African American, fleeing through the kitchen's back door. In the ensuing chaos, Bart was shot in the arm, but managed to avoid more serious injury. The attacker escaped. Bart, now in the living room, frantically dialed emergency services, not realizing a neighbor had already called them. By the time of Bart's call, the entire family had been attacked. As police and ambulances were dispatched, a concerned neighbor, hearing the gunshots, rushed over. He found Kent outside, gravely injured but conscious, and quickly fashioned a tourniquet from his shirt. Approaching Patricia, all she could utter was, "He shot us," before succumbing to her injuries and being unable to speak further. The neighbors stayed by their side until help arrived. Tragically, young Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene, a heartbreaking end to what began as a night of celebration. In the wake of the tragic shooting, Patricia, gravely injured, was airlifted to the hospital. Sadly, her injuries were too severe, and she passed away before they could reach the hospital. Meanwhile, Kevin and Bart, the eldest son, both wounded in the arm, were rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Thankfully, they were conscious and alert, their conditions not life-threatening. The crime scene was a hive of police activity as investigators tried piecing together the events of that fateful night. Initially, it looked like a robbery gone horribly wrong. A lone glove lay outside, a haunting clue, and inside, a gun, the instrument of the night's horror, was found on the kitchen floor, close to where Bart had been shot. The story took an unexpected turn the following day. Reporter, delving deeper into Bart's claimed university graduation, made a startling discovery. Bart was not enrolled at the university and was far from graduating. This revelation, once passed to the police, added a complex layer to the investigation. In the hospital, detectives confronted Kent with the news of Bart's academic deception. Surprisingly, Kent's reaction was one of calm acceptance rather than shock or grief, despite the tragedy that had struck his family. The police then turned to Bart, seeking an explanation for his lies. Overwhelmed by academic pressure and fearful of disappointing his high-expectation parents, Bart confessed to fabricating his educational success. Amidst this turmoil, the community gathered to mourn Patricia and Kevin's passing. The funeral service, attended by over 1,000 people, reflected the family's standing in the community. Friends of Kevin shared heartfelt tributes, painting a picture of a generous and beloved individual. Bart, too, was a focal point of these tributes, often hailed as a role model by his younger brother. As the investigation progressed, the initial theory of a burglary unraveled. Despite the presence of cash and valuables in the house, nothing was missing, steering the investigation towards more personal motives behind the tragic incident. The detectives, piecing together the chilling events at the Whitaker home, noticed something odd about the master bedroom. The drawers were all slightly open. It was as if someone had peeked inside, but didn't rummage through. Curiously, nothing seemed missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if the attacker knew exactly when the family would return, a suspicion further fueled by the precise nature of the shooting. 4 shots were fired in the dark house, each hitting a different family member, with 4 shell casings found at the scene. It seemed the assailant either knew the layout of the house well or was an exceptionally skilled shooter. The gun used in the shooting, found on the kitchen floor, bore no fingerprints, just a partial palm print, not enough to identify anyone. When they traced the gun's registration, it was linked to Kevin, the younger son who was already deceased. He had kept the gun in a safe in his room, which had been forcefully opened. Intriguingly, the master bedroom, where valuable items were stored, was left untouched. Instead, the focus was on Kevin's room, where the safe was cracked open to retrieve the gun. This indicated that the assailant was searching for something specific and knew exactly where to find it. The only item missing from the house was Bart's cell phone, which he had dropped during the chase and the assailant had picked up. The investigation took a turn when a friend from Bart's past reached out to the police. This friend revealed a shocking plot. 2 years earlier, in 2001, Bart had solicited him to murder his family in exchange for payment. The plan detailed by the friend mirrored the actual events that unfolded. Although the friend, Adam, had an alibi for the night of the murders, the police were intrigued by the striking similarities between the planned and executed crimes. Adding to the complexity, Jennifer, another friend of Bart's, had overheard him and his roommate discussing a similar plot. Alarmed, she confronted Bart, who ambiguously brushed off her concerns. Despite Jennifer's subsequent report to the police and their conversation with Bart's parents, the matter was not pursued further, partly due to the parents' trust in their son. Following their discharge from the hospital, Bart and his father, Kent, returned to live in their house. Despite the police's concerns for Kent's safety, he remained steadfast in his belief in Bart's innocence. Noting Bart's exemplary behavior and newfound religious devotion since leaving the hospital, the mystery deepened around Bart's involvement in the crime. Detectives couldn't shake off their suspicions, especially recalling his previous attempt to plot a similar crime with his friend Adam. They started digging into Bart's current circle, zeroing in on 2 names: Chris, his roommate, and Stephen, a neighbor. Both young men were known for their carefree lifestyles, lacking stable jobs and clear future plans. When the police questioned them, both Chris and Stephen staunchly denied any involvement in the crime. In an unconventional move, the detectives asked for DNA and scent samples from the duo. They used a sterilized gauze soaked in distilled water to capture their scents. These samples were then lined up alongside others, including the suspected ones. A scent detection dog was employed, first introduced to the scent of the gun, drawers, and glove from the crime scene, and then to the lineup of scent samples. Remarkably, in all 3 tests, the dog matched the scent on the crime scene items to Chris's scent. However, this type of evidence wasn't enough to hold up in court, and detectives knew they needed more to build a solid case. As they delved deeper, detectives found that the robbery scene didn't add up, and Bart's lie about attending university only cast more doubt on him. They even tapped the phone lines of Chris and Stephen, hoping to catch something incriminating. Bart, for his part, seemed cooperative during police interrogations and even participated in a reenactment at the crime scene, but his accounts were vague and unconvincing. In a twist, the police got Adam, the friend who had revealed Bart's 2001 murder plan, to call and blackmail Bart. In that call, Bart neither confirmed nor denied his involvement, but agreed to pay Adam $20,000 to keep silent. Later, Adam received $250 in cash from Bart, and the police found Bart's fingerprints on the envelope, further linking him to the crime. 7 months after the murders, in July 2004, Bart told his father, Kent, he was going out with friends. The next morning, with Bart nowhere to be found, a worried Kent contacted the police. They discovered Bart's truck abandoned outside some apartments, far from his home, with the engine still running. This strange occurrence, coupled with the fact that Bart had stolen $7,000 from Kent, started to turn Kent's belief in his son's innocence. The police, not letting up, increased pressure on Chris and Stephen. They conducted extensive interviews with their families and acquaintances, keeping the investigation active. Their persistence paid off a year later. Unable to live with the guilt, Stephen came clean to the police, confirming their suspicions. He confessed that Bart had orchestrated the murder of his family, motivated by the prospect of inheriting everything if his younger brother was also eliminated. Bart had promised a share of the inheritance to both Chris and Stephen, though he never specified an amount. Stephen revealed that while he didn't enter the house and only acted as the getaway driver, Chris was the one who went inside and executed the shootings. Stephen also admitted that he was initially reluctant, but was coerced into the plan. The final piece of evidence surfaced when the police, 18 months after the crime, discovered a backpack thrown into a lake by Stephen and Chris. Inside the backpack were items linking them to the murders: a chisel with blue paint matching the forced open safe, bullets identical to those used in the crime, a matching glove to the one found at the crime scene, a partially empty water bottle of Chris's DNA, and 2 cell phones registered in Bart's name, used for communication during the crime. After the shocking confession from Stephen, the police quickly arrested Chris and Stephen. But the saga took another twist 8 days later, on September 15, 2005. A Mexican man named Rudy Rios, lured by a $10,000 police reward, made a call that would crack the case wide open. Rios confessed he had sold his identity to Bart for $3,000 and had even helped him escape to a small town on the Mexican border. There, Bart, funded by the stolen money from his father, blended into the local life. He rented a room, became a regular at the local church, made new friends, and even found a girlfriend. Her family, owning a furniture business, unsuspectingly welcomed him, believing his fabricated tale of being an injured military deserter from Afghanistan. Rios, eyeing the reward money, gave the police detailed information on Bart's location, leading to his arrest by Mexican authorities for illegal residence. He was then handed over to the U.S. police to face trial for the grim events of December 10th. On that fateful night, Bart orchestrated a dinner outing, under the pretense of celebrating his false university graduation. He needed his family to leave and return home together, setting the stage for the planned attack. At the house, Bart casually took photos with his family, even making an obscene gesture in one, a haunting detail given the impending doom he knew was coming. Bart maintained a calm face at the restaurant, later describing himself as feeling numb. Meanwhile, Chris, waiting in Bart's truck, accidentally dropped a glove, a critical piece of evidence later found by the police. Using the key and alarm code given by Bart, Chris entered the house, avoiding any signs of forced entry. He retrieved the gun from Kevin's safe and lay in wait. As the family left the restaurant, Stephen, stationed outside, gave Chris the signal. Stephen discreetly followed the family home, parking a block away to await the aftermath. Chris, following the plan, shot the 3 family members inside the house and then Bart in the arm, to disguise him as another victim. Bart's subsequent call to emergency services included a misleading description of the attacker, further complicating the initial investigation. After the horrendous act, the 2 drove to a lake, their mission to dispose of a bag containing the damning evidence of their crime. Back at their homes, Chris and Stephen waited anxiously for Bart's call, expecting to discuss their payment for the grim deed. Yet the call never came, and Bart failed to deliver any form of compensation for their involvement. March 2007 marked the beginning of Bart's trial, where a series of startling admissions came to light. Bart confessed to plotting the murder of his family, not once but 3 times. His first attempt dated back to December 2000 with a couple of friends. Their plan failed when an attempted break-in triggered the house alarm, sending them fleeing. A few months later, Vart designed another plan with his friend Adam, which never materialized beyond mere talk, thanks to their friend Jennifer overhearing and reporting them. The third attempt, tragically successful, was executed with Chris and Stephen. Even after his parents uncovered the second plot, Vart, driven by a big desire to see his family dead, did not deter from his fatal intentions. During the trial, friends involved in the earlier, unsuccessful plans were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony against Bart. Despite Bart's claims of guilt and remorse, Stephen's testimony painted a different picture, revealing Bart's cold request to finish the job by killing his father in the hospital. Bart's duplicity extended even to his girlfriend's family in Mexico. He spun a web of lies, claiming he was an only child, unloved, with a mother who was a prostitute. Living under a false identity, he felt emboldened to fabricate this false narrative. In a disturbing revelation, his girlfriend testified that Bart, in a twisted attempt to comfort her during a family dispute, suggested they could kill her parents, a suggestion she thankfully did not take seriously. The trial, lasting a mere 7 days, concluded with the jury needing only 2 hours to declare Bart guilty. With the death penalty looming over him in Texas, Bart took the stand in his defense, pleading for his life and arguing against the capital punishment. The prosecution grilled Bart on the potential danger he posed to society. His defense: he claimed to have harbored hatred only towards his family. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to death. Bart's case was peculiar. There was no history of abuse from his parents. They were loving, supportive, and provided him with every opportunity, including luxury cars and a house for university. Despite receiving everything materially, Bart testified he felt unloved and blamed his family for the person he had become, seeking revenge for a life he resented. Bart's journey through the justice system was a tumultuous one, marked by repeated attempts by his lawyers to overturn his death sentence. Yet, each appeal hit a dead end, as the courts consistently denied them. Throughout this ordeal, Kent, Bart's father, remained a steadfast pillar of support. Despite the gravity of his son's crimes, Kent publicly forgave Bart, professing belief in his son's remorse and vowing to stand by him until the very end. As the years in prison passed, the inevitable drew closer for Bart. 11 years after his sentencing, his execution was scheduled for February 22, 2018. With the clock ticking down, Kent ramped up his efforts to save his son. He appeared on television programs and passionately pleaded with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, hoping for a miracle. In a dramatic turn of events just 2 days before the execution, the board, moved by Kent's unwavering advocacy, unanimously recommended clemency for Bart. However, the final word was in the hands of the Texas governor. On the day destined for Bart's execution, as the grim procedures commenced, a glimmer of hope emerged. Bart had his last meal and precious moments with his father, perhaps for the last time. But fate had a twist in store. 45 minutes before the execution, the governor granted Bart clemency, sparing his life on the condition that he would never challenge his new sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Chris, the triggerman in the tragic saga, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years behind bars. Steve, the getaway driver who aided the prosecution, faced a relatively lighter sentence of 15 years due to his cooperation, and has since been released from prison. Guayaquil, the capital of the Guayas province, is one of the largest cities in Ecuador. Located on a peninsula by the Guayas River It serves as the country's commercial hub. Known as the gateway to the Pacific beaches and the famous Galapagos Islands, Guayaquil is also a major port and center for imports and exports. It's the second most populated city in Ecuador, after Quito, with a rough estimate of 2.7 million inhabitants. Approximately 400,000 of these residents live in Guasmo Sur, one of the informal neighborhoods in the southern central part of the city. Guasmo Sur is considered the poorest neighborhood in Guayaquil. It struggles with overpopulation, poverty, and frequent criminal activities. Most of its current inhabitants are migrants from rural areas who moved to this urban but isolated part of Guayaquil seeking better employment opportunities and an improved quality of life. The majority of the buildings in Guasmo Sur are made of blocks, yet some houses are constructed with wood, cardboard, and other common materials. The area was named Guasmo because of the once abundant tropical trees of the same name, which were later felled to pave the way for urban development and local industries. In 2018, 19-year-old Kathleen Alexandra Leana resided in Guasmo Sur. Her residence was owned by Ramiro Alta Morando. According to him, it wasn't profitable to rent out one of his ground floor spaces for businesses, as tenants frequently failed and returned the keys. As a result, he decided to remodel the commercial space into a residential apartment. The first tenants arrived on August 9, 2018. A family consisting of a mother and her 4 children, with Kathleen Leana being the oldest daughter. He lived on the upper floor of the same building. Relatives and neighbors of Kathleen Leana described her as a calm girl with no signs of violent tendencies. By October 2018, Kathleen was working because she had applied for a university spot, which she unfortunately did not secure. Less than 5 kilometers away from Guasmo Sur lies Isla Trinitaria, an area crisscrossed by the perimeter road and also plagued with security issues. Isla Trinitaria has a predominantly Afro-descended population, with many of their homes being built on illegally acquired land and constructed with cement and cane. In Isla Trinitaria, 21-year-old Veronica Jasmine Silva Ruiz lived in the southern part of the main port. Veronica Silva was studying systems engineering at the University of Guayaquil and was about to begin her second semester. She lived with her parents and siblings, being the youngest daughter of Alberto Silva and Maria Ruiz. Many claimed that Veronica and Kathleen Leana had been friends since school days, but Veronica's mother was unaware of this relationship and did not know Kathleen. However, it's confirmed that both young women shared 2 things in common. They were neighbors and both knew Herbo Urques, a 20-year-old man. Maria Ruiz, Veronica's mother, also didn't know about the alleged romantic relationship her daughter had with Jer, who had also been Kathleen Leana's romantic partner. On the morning of Tuesday, October 2, 2018, Veronica left her home early. By 9 a.m., she bid her parents farewell, heading to the University of Guayaquil. That was the last time they saw her alive. Her mother mentioned that Veronica went to the university without breakfast as she needed to submit a document and intended to return home quickly for lunch. Her father mentioned expecting her home around 11 a.m. When they didn't hear from her, her disappearance was reported to the prosecutor's office on the morning of Wednesday, October 3, 2018. 34 hours after Veronica's departure, her elder sister Rudy received a mysterious friend request on Facebook. A 20-year-old man identified himself as Veronica's boyfriend, claiming he knew of Veronica's whereabouts since his ex-mother-in-law had shown him some of her personal belongings. These items were found in an apartment in Guasmo Sur, which belonged to Kathleen Leana. Rudy informed her parents about this Facebook conversation, and they went to the flagrancy unit of the state prosecutor's office that Wednesday night to report the information. Around 7 p.m., investigators from the National Department of Crimes Against Life, Violent Deaths, Disappearances, Extortion, and kidnapping confirmed that the body they had discovered dismembered at 2 p.m. that same day matched the family's descriptions. Initially, it was believed that Veronica never went to the university that day, but had been lured to Kathleen Leana's apartment, located 6 blocks from where they found Veronica's dismembered body.
Leana allegedly called Veronica to gossip about her boyfriend, who had previously been Leana's partner and, according to Leana, was still secretly seeing her. Later, it was confirmed that Veronica did attend the university on the morning of October 2, 2018, as she had told her parents. This account was
Corroborated by a university professor and later shared with agents from the National Department of Crimes Against Life. Violent deaths, disappearances, extortion, and kidnapping when they were investigating the disappearance. Veronica Silva was last seen at the university with a young woman believed to be Kathleen Leana and a young man. Their identities could not be confirmed as the faculty's security cameras were offline. By the afternoon of Wednesday, October 13, 2018, Veronica Silva's body was discovered inside 2 black bags placed within plastic boxes on a tricycle in Guasmo Sur. Bystanders, upon discovering the human remains, alerted the authorities. The tricycle was seized for investigation. At 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday, October 3, Kathleen Leana confessed to the murder. "I cut her in half," she informed the police. Her account of the crime was harrowing. Kathleen claimed she had invited Veronica Silva to her home on Tuesday, October 2, under the pretext of gossip. In reality, she wanted to confront her about the relationship Veronica allegedly had with Kathleen's ex-boyfriend. The two were supposedly still seeing each other secretly, and he had proposed to Veronica. When Veronica tried to leave, Kathleen threatened her with a knife. Kathleen tied Veronica's arms behind her back with plastic and began strangling her with an electrical cord. According to Kathleen, Veronica pleaded to be let go. There were moments Kathleen would relent, only to tighten the cord again. At some point, Veronica attempted to grab a knife, resulting in a struggle on the floor where Kathleen eventually strangled Veronica to death. After the murder, Kathleen tried to dismember the body with a kitchen knife but couldn't sever the head. She attempted to burn the face with alcohol, succeeding only in burning Veronica's hair and face. With family due home soon, Kathleen hid the body beneath her bed, covering it with stuffed animals and sheets. Disturbingly, she slept that night with Veronica's body still under the bed. On Wednesday, October 3, 2018, Kathleen decided to incinerate the body but failed. She placed the body parts in bags and sought out her uncle, Jose Rodriguez, to borrow his work tricycle. Initially hesitant, he eventually lent it to her. When she delayed returning it, he went to look for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Kathleen later told him the tricycle had been stolen, but he discovered from colleagues that the police had confiscated it due to its involvement in a death. Kathleen also admitted to asking a passerby for help loading the heavy bags onto the tricycle. After placing Veronica's remains on the tricycle, Kathleen paid a minor cousin $5 to help her push the tricycle towards a garbage dump, with the boy unaware of the gruesome contents within the bags. 5 blocks away from Kathleen's house, one of the bags fell off the tricycle. Panicking, Kathleen fled when a security guard approached her for littering. Ramiro, the owner of the building where the murder occurred, reported never hearing any alarming noises or cries from upstairs. He only noticed a strong scent, similar to chicken blood. Considering that chickens are frequently slaughtered in the area, he dismissed the smell, not thinking it came from a human body or his own building. In fact, he even considered confronting them about a potential spill, but his wife advised against it. That night, over 10 police officers raided his house. Upon surrendering to the police, Kathleen Leana claimed she acted alone. However, investigators were suspicious there might be other accomplices. Veronica's mother, Maria Ruiz, also doubted Kathleen's solitary involvement. pointing out her daughter's height and strength. Given Kathleen's story, the primary theory presented by the National Department of Crimes Against Life, violent deaths, disappearances, extortion, and kidnapping, was that of a crime of passion stemming from jealousy. Specifically, it was believed to revolve around a presumed love triangle involving Veronica Silva, Kathleen Leana, and Halee Alexander. It's noteworthy that Veronica's mother had never heard of these individuals before. Later, Kathleen changed her account, implicating Halee in the crime. She alleged that Halee was prostituting them via a website and participated in Veronica's murder by holding the electrical cord used for strangulation. According to the attorney representing Veronica's family, the young university student was murdered for refusing to engage in prostitution via a website supposedly run by Halee. In September 2019, Kathleen Leana was sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison for the murder and dismemberment of Veronica Silva in October 2018. Kathleen's defense appealed the ruling, considering it unjust. In October 2020, an appeal hearing was held, conducted virtually due to the coronavirus pandemic. The presiding judge denied the defense's claims, who now argued Kathleen had only discarded the body, not committed the murder. The verdict against Kathleen Leana included a fine of 1,000 basic salaries to the state and a $20,000 compensation to the victim's mother. During a hearing at the prosecutor's General State Flagrancy Unit, Kathleen Leana's defense requested a psychological evaluation for their client and proposed for transfer to a psychological care institution instead of the Female Social Rehabilitation Center where she had been sent. The forensic clinical psychologist stated that Kathleen might exhibit psychopathic traits and signs of schizophrenia. However, since she acted with clear intent and conscience, she wasn't exempt from legal responsibility. She had meticulously planned everything, showing premeditation and malice when committing the crime. Before becoming the center of attention, Halee told the public prosecutor's office that he had known Kathleen Leana for 3 years and had a romantic relationship with her for 2 years. He mentioned ending the relationship due to her possessive nature, recalling an instance where she threatened him with scissors, warning him not to message any female friends. Halee also reported that on Wednesday, October 3, 2018, Kathleen called him asking if he had a machete. When he inquired about its purpose, she claimed it was to clear some shrubs outside her house. Later that afternoon, he received a message from Kathleen saying she needed to leave as someone was looking to kill her. This was the account Jer shared with the public prosecutor before becoming a prime suspect himself. Not long after, the police sought him out for questioning. Veronica Silva's mother acknowledged that while nothing could bring her daughter back, she took solace in knowing that her daughter's killer would serve a significant sentence for the heinous act. To her, justice had been served. She emphasized the need to apprehend Halee, who was on the run, and also who she believed also had a hand in her daughter's murder. On October 6, 2018, Veronica Silva's funeral was held. Her head was adorned with a white lace crown, making her look like a sleeping maiden. During the funeral, the song Amor Eterno by Juan Gabriel played. Her mother was inconsolable, speaking to Veronica through the glass of the casket, pleading for her to look back. Maria's grief was palpable, screaming as she refused to let go of her daughter. It was a loss she would never overcome, forever scarring her life. Maria repeatedly expressed that her daughter, a calm and peaceful young woman, didn't deserve such a brutal, horrific end. After all, who does? In September 2021, the National Police confirmed the arrest of Halee Alexander Boorks Bastidis. He is believed to be the second individual involved in the murder of his girlfriend. On September 27, 2020, police and several neighbors from the Florencio del Castillo community were attempting to locate a young woman named Allison Bonilla, who had been missing for more than 5 months. They headed to an illegal dump located in San Jeronimo de Caxia in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. The first thing they spotted was a sock and a shoe, inside of which was a nail. Yendri, Allison's mother, instantly identified the clothing and even recognized the nail. Due to the nail polish color that had been applied at her nail salon, they're failing to find any more remains of the young woman. The search party withdrew, disheartened, but not defeated. The next day, they returned to the area and ventured down to a nearby coffee plantation, located 93 meters deep into the illegal dumping ground. What they found left them completely stunned. Buried beneath the soil, moss and weeds were skeletal remains of the young woman, including vertebrae, ribs, parts of her upper limbs, pelvic bones, and a femur connected by cartilage. 8 meters from that site, they discovered a piece of fabric belonging to the pants Allison was wearing the day she disappeared. A little further away, they found a second shoe and part of an arm. It appeared that the mysterious neighbor who had provided this information had not lied. The event had been as horrific as he had described. But how did all this happen? Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in the city of Cartago, Costa Rica. When she was very young, her parents divorced and she went to live with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. They moved to the Florencio del Castillo community in the town of Whitakers. Despite her family's modest economic standing, Allison never lacked for anything. Growing up in a nurturing environment led her to become a highly sociable, friendly, and attentive young woman. Everyone who knew her adored her. She had an especially close relationship with her mother. They were like friends. Allison would even sometimes help her mother at her nail salon. At 18 years old, Allison led a quiet life. She attended night classes at a school which was several kilometers away from her home. In her town, it was common for young people to attend schools far from their communities, so walking through the streets was a routine part of her day. She spent most of her time with her boyfriend, Harold Segura. Her days typically consisted of going from school to her boyfriend's house or meeting up with friends and family. However, this routine was shattered on March 4, 2020. At 5 p.m., Allison left her home wearing blue jeans, a white and mustard-colored blouse, and light-colored sneakers. She took a collective bus to go to the school and traveled the 5.5 kilometers to the institution with a friend. She arrived around 6 p.m. She said goodbye to her friend and decided to visit her aunt who lived nearby. She arrived at her aunt's house, but no one was home. She then went to her boyfriend's house, where she met his mother, and they chatted for a while. Eventually, Harold arrived, and they spent the rest of the afternoon together until he had to leave for an errand. Seeing that it was getting dark, Allison thought it would be best to leave as soon as possible and did not wait for her boyfriend to return to say goodbye. At 8 o'clock, Allison walked to the bus stop that would take her home to Florencio del Castillo. 10 minutes after boarding the bus, she received a text message from Harold, who was extremely worried. He told her it would have been better if she had waited for him to accompany her home. 40 minutes later, Allison got off at the bus stop closest to her home, but she still had a long distance to walk. The street was deserted, and the only light came from a few streetlights. Feeling somewhat anxious, Allison began the 1.6-kilometer walk to her home. She sent a message to her mother, Yendri, asking her to meet at a bridge 500 meters away from their house as they usually did. While walking, Allison noticed two men who appeared suspicious. They were heading in the same direction as her, so she quickened her pace and texted Harold, saying, "I was on the bus and just got off, and these two sketchy guys got off as well and are walking behind me. I'm going to speed up because I'm scared." Concerned, Harold advised her to take a taxi and promised to pay for it, but Allison declined. She texted him that she was close to the bridge where she was supposed to meet her mother. The men began to walk faster as if trying to catch up with her. When Yendri arrived at the meeting point, there was no sign of Allison. She repeatedly called her daughter's phone, but got no answer. Distraught, Yendri returned home, hoping that Allison might have taken an alternate route and had already arrived. Upon reaching home, she found it empty. The last time Allison had been online was at 8:40 p.m. Yendri tried to contact her again, but the messages went unanswered. The next day, she officially reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. The authorities began searching for clues to Allison's whereabouts. The first lead was security footage from a camera near the bridge where Allison was supposed to meet her mother. The tape showed her walking down the street toward her home, 8:47 p.m., at some point quickening her pace before disappearing into the darkness. There were no further traces of her after that. The following day, the Judicial Investigation Organization and the Ministry of Public Security joined the search. They examined various places close to the locality, including a lake and a nearby hydroelectric dam. The case drew the attention of the community, who decided to assist the authorities in the search. While investigating the streets near Allison's home, they discovered an object that caught their attention: a pair of plasters lying on the ground. This development was strange because the police had already searched the same area on the first day and found no trace of Allison. Someone seemed to be attempting to mislead them. On March 11th, a local resident came to the police station to share something suspicious he had seen on the day of Allison's disappearance. Around 8:30 p.m., the neighbor observed Allison walking briskly down the street near the bridge. A wine-colored BMW was parked nearby and started to follow her, gradually increasing its speed before stopping in front of her. Allison spoke for a few seconds with the person inside the car and then got in. The car then sped away at high speed. Upon hearing the neighbor's account, the police took immediate action to locate the vehicle. They searched all the houses near Allison's residence. On March 25th, they found the car in one of these homes. On March 29th, the Judicial Investigation Organization announced that they had seized the car for DNA testing. They also revealed that an investigation was underway against the car's owner, a man named Nelson Sanchez Urena. The 28-year-old man was known in the neighborhood for being extremely reclusive. He hardly spoke to anyone, and when he did, he was not friendly. Locals said he came from a somewhat strange family about which not much was known. One even speculated that he was involved with regional gangs. While the police continued to gather evidence to warrant the arrest of Sanchez Urena, now, the prime suspect in Allison's disappearance, another significant event occurred. On April 4th, an employee of a store near the area found Allison's identification card. This was the second item belonging to Allison that had mysteriously appeared. The search continued, with authorities believing they were getting closer to discovering Allison's whereabouts. On April 17th, the police confirmed that they had found significant clues related to Allison's disappearance in the seized car, although they did not disclose any further details. On May 1st, the Costa Rican Red Cross joined the search efforts for Allison. Despite more people joining the search team, her body still remained missing. In the following months, the police focused on investigating the prime suspect and gathering enough evidence to charge him. Finally, on September 2nd, the Judicial Investigation Organization ordered the arrest of Sanchez Urena. He was formally arrested at same day without resistance. 24 hours later, authorities revealed that they had found traces of blood in the trunk, the car that had been seized over 5 months ago. These traces were matched with DNA samples from Allison Bonilla's family. The results confirmed that there was no doubt that Sanchez Urena had attacked the young woman inside his car. Realizing that there was no turning back, Sanchez Urena decided it was time to confess his crime. He requested a meeting with his lawyer to reconstruct the events for the police. On March 4th, 2020, Sanchez Urena was driving his car when he saw Allison walking quickly down the street. He offered her a ride home, claiming it was late and that two nearby strangers looked suspicious. Trusting him, Allison got into the car, but once inside, Sanchez Urena attacked her and forced her into the trunk of the vehicle. He then took her to a coffee plantation. Once there, he forced her out of the car and took her about 140 meters from the entrance of the property, where no one could hear them. After reaching the secluded spot, he struck her, causing an injury that left her unconscious. Blood splattered on the ground as he proceeded to assault her. After completing the horrific act, he walked back to where he had left his car, put Allison's body in the front seat, and tied her hands with a piece of cloth and adhesive tape. He then placed her back in the trunk of the car. Next, Sanchez Urena drove to an illegal dumping ground and took Allison, who was still unconscious, out of the trunk. Without hesitation, he threw the body into a coffee plantation approximately 450 meters deep to ensure that she would remain there undetected. The police subsequently ordered 6 months of preventive detention for the main suspect. That same day, they went to the illegal dumping ground to search for Allison's body. Dozens of volunteers who had been following the case on TV and were devastated by the news of her loss joined the search. On September 27, a sock and a shoe were found, which Allison's mother, Yendri, identified as belonging to her daughter. Inside the shoe was a nail that the mother instantly recognized, as she had painted it in her salon just days before her daughter's disappearance. The following day, a team of rescuers descended into a coffee plantation near the illegal dumping ground. Using safety ropes and specialized mountaineering equipment, they reached a depth of 93 meters where they found vertebrae, ribs, parts of the upper limbs, pelvis, and a femur connected by cartilage. These remains were covered in undergrowth, soil, and moss, some even fused to the ground. 8 meters from the previous site, a piece of fabric was found, belonging to the pants Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared. A second shoe and small bone fragments, which appeared to be part of an arm, were also discovered. They were unable to locate the young woman's skull. It may have rolled out of sight due to its shape. The remains were taken to a laboratory to verify if they match Allison's DNA. Forensic experts found that the body had fractures in the thoracic spine and ribs, which were consistent with the injuries caused by the fall, as described by the suspect. This indicated that they were dealing with a premeditated murder. Although Yendri, Allison's mother, was utterly devastated by the loss of her daughter, she found some solace in knowing that Sanchez Urena would spend the rest of his life in jail. During a press conference, Yendri's lawyers stated that they would do everything possible to ensure the murderer faced the full extent of the law, serving as many years in prison as possible. While they couldn't bring Allison back to life, they could seek justice on her behalf. As they awaited the start of the legal process, Allison's family held a funeral. On March 1, 2021, Sanchez was officially charged with homicide. On April 30, the criminal court ordered his trial and extended his pretrial detention by another 4 months to prevent any escape attempts. While the case had made significant progress, the most challenging part remained, gathering enough evidence to prove the act was premeditated. Yendri testified that Sanchez Urena had previous encounters with Allison. On one occasion, Allison had gone to pick up her cousins from the bus stop and met the suspect. The man offered them a ride home, which they accepted despite the awkward silence during the trip. Days later, Allison received a message on Facebook from Sanchez Urena asking if she disliked him. Allison replied that she didn't, as they had never spoken, and she didn't know him well enough to form an opinion. The man tersely acknowledged her response. This demonstrated a long-term obsession with Allison, as he even claimed to be deeply in love with her and envious of those she spent time with. However, during the trial, the defendant completely changed his version of events. He claimed innocence and said his previous statements were made under police pressure and torture. Nevertheless, there was no turning back. The body was found where he initially indicated, and DNA evidence in the car directly implicated him. Allison's family provided their testimony in a separate room, as they did not want to face the attacker. Despite this, Sanchez Urena continued to plead innocent. On the morning of August 18, 2021, he was officially sentenced to 18 years in prison for simple homicide. He was acquitted of the abuse charge due to the state in which Allison's body was found, making it impossible to prove. The family was dissatisfied with the sentence, calling for up to 35 years in prison, which is customary in such cases. The verdict was later annulled by the Criminal Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and the case was reopened to determine if the crime involved premeditation. In November 2021, the appeals court rejected the family's claims and upheld the original sentence. As of today, the case remains open, and Allison's family is pushing for the crime to be reclassified as aggravated homicide and for a review of the sentence. Yendri, Allison's mother, has not only had to cope with the horrific loss of her daughter, but also with cyberbullying. Dozens of people found her Facebook profile and posted messages on her wall, blaming her for Allison's death because she had allowed her daughter to walk alone at night. Local residents came forward in various meetings to say that it's entirely normal for young people in the region to walk long distances from bus stops to their homes. Allison's boyfriend has given several interviews, expressing his outrage over what happened. He mentioned that Allison had many dreams and goals, which Sanchez Urena took away from her. Despite this, he felt grateful for the 1 year and 10 months he had spent with her, stating that she will always be his angel and the best life partner he could have ever had. Although the investigation has technically closed, several questions remain. The family's lawyer has pointed out that it is quite strange for Sanchez Urena to have moved Allison's body to the bottom of a landfill without any help. There is also the mystery of who the men were who had been pursuing Allison on the day of her disappearance, which prompted her to get into the car of her former neighbor. After an audio message that Allison sent her boyfriend went viral, the public has one burning question. Did these two men have anything to do with Sanchez Urena's sinister plan? And if not, why were they following the young woman late at night? The trial concluded too quickly, leaving the family dissatisfied with the sentence. They hope that, in the future, such cases will receive the necessary attention so that all those involved face the appropriate penalties. Little is known about the early life of John Parker. It's scarcely mentioned that he was born in 1970, had at least one sibling, and lived in Indiana, United States. He came from a middle-class family and was always an entrepreneurial young man with a desire for independence, self-improvement, and a hunger to take on the world. Therefore, it's not surprising that immediately after graduating from high school, he sought ways to earn money and, according to his brother, his first job was as a waiter's assistant in a restaurant, though he didn't last long there. For reasons unknown, John became angry at work and quit. However, this did not deter his ambitions, and sooner rather than later, he found a new job that not only allowed him more independence in his tasks, but also led him to discover his true calling: sales. John began working as a door-to-door salesman for Kirby vacuum cleaners. Initially, his family mocked him, but in a short time, John proved to everyone that he had found his direction in life. In fact, by the end of his first year, he was practically the company's #1 salesman in the area and announced he wouldn't settle for just that. Working long hours, from 12 to 16 hours a day, he became not only a sales leader whose achievements were recognized at company meetings, but also a guide for other salespeople who found new ideas, inspiration, and a role model in him. It was during this time that he met 20-year-old Judy, a young girl who was born in October 1969 and lived in Texas in a low-income family of 3 children. She was very outgoing, and even though John was not looking to hire more salespeople at the time, Judy convinced him that she was the best in the sales field. Despite her young age, she was not a shy girl. In fact, she was a fully grown woman who, with her parents' consent, had married at 14 and was divorced with 2 children, Christina and Daniel Hicks, by the time she met John. John decided to give this determined applicant a chance and became her mentor in vacuum cleaner sales. Judy not only earned a place in the sales force led by John, but also won the heart of her boss, and sometime later, they embarked on a romantic relationship. John's life could not have been better. He had a well-earned reputation as an excellent salesman and trainer, and also had Judy's support in life and work. With these foundations, he decided to start his own business in Michigan, becoming a sales and service operator for Kirby vacuum cleaners. He also offered training sessions for salespeople, passing on his personal secret and the enthusiasm that had made him a star in the sector. His company was recognized as one of the top in the area, and John always highlighted that he had achieved this success thanks to Judy's support. In 1992, with his professional life resolved, the couple got married, and in the following years, they dedicated themselves to demonstrating what a good salesperson could achieve in life. The couple had 2 daughters, Tiffany and Erica, bringing the number of children in the family to 4. They moved residences several times, always to better locations, and the children began to enjoy the benefits earned through the hard work of John and Judy. Initially, he had no issues with his wife's children. Christina was a sweet little girl, and Daniel was somewhat hyperactive and mischievous. The Parkers enjoyed a good home, excellent schools for the children, high-end cars, and frequent vacations. John was amassing a significant fortune and didn't want to hide it. On the contrary, he used it as an incentive for the young salespeople he trained, showing them what could be achieved through hard work. However, as time passed and Judy's children entered their teenage years, problems began. Christina's choice of friends was terrible, as she chose those with the worst behavior and engaged in drinking with them. Allegedly, according to some sources, she also used drugs. Meanwhile, 13-year-old Daniel was not on a good path either and seemed to be angry and poorly accompanied all the time. On one occasion, while with a group of friends, Daniel took John's car and drove around the neighborhood, destroying many of the mailbox posts. The next day, John went from house to house paying the owners for the damage caused to prevent them from reporting the boy to the police. Around this time, John was also called to his stepson's school to receive a complaint about the boy's bad behavior. It appears that on this occasion, John ended up hitting the young man, which of course generated tension in the relationship. After 9 years together, Judy finally took her family to Texas so they could see the humble place where she had grown up and meet one of her brothers who still lived there. During this trip, Judy complained to her brother that her marriage was failing and that John mistreated her children. The truth was that Judy, far from recognizing that her older children were on the wrong path, sided with them, which of course heated up what seemed to be a pressure cooker. If everything was already bad, things worsened when John began to suspect that his wife was being unfaithful with an employee of his company. True to his way of solving problems, John was not a man to sit and stew over a problem, but a man of action. To leave no room for doubt, he installed cameras in various parts of the office and finally obtained irrefutable proof that confirmed his suspicions. At that moment, John's world collapsed, and his previously cheerful and cordial behavior took a 180-degree turn. He began to drink, and under the influence of alcohol, he not only had terrible arguments with Judy but also became rough towards his children. His daughter Tiffany received a beating with a belt when her teacher informed her father that she had not brought her homework to school. When the teacher saw the marks from the beating the next day, she called social services to report the incident. Before they arrived, John made it clear to the four kids that if they wanted to continue enjoying the luxurious life they had been living up to that moment, it was better to say nothing about the beating. Indeed, Tiffany blamed her stepbrother Daniel for what had happened, and he did not deny it. However, John's bad mood didn't only affect his family. His employees and even the company's clients suffered from the betrayed husband's outbursts of rage. Seeking to put distance between his wife and her lover, he decided to move the family to an exclusive area in Crown Point, Indiana. Despite still being in love with Judy and hoping that by removing her from temptation they could have a fresh start, things did not improve. While Judy began to improve her appearance by losing weight and changing her look, John let his beard grow, started smoking, his wardrobe was reduced to jeans, and he was constantly distracted. The business suffered as a result of his state, ending up almost bankrupt and having to sell his boat to stay afloat. Rumors circulated in the office that Judy was having an affair with Jeff, John's right-hand man. Though it was unclear if the rumors were true, they undoubtedly fueled more disagreements. At a certain point, Judy informed him that she had decided to divorce, but it wouldn't be that simple. John felt that he had given everything to his wife, pulled her out of poverty, accepted her children, showered her with luxuries, and above all, loved her to the point of idolatry. With that same passion turned into resentment, he began to cut off all his wife's sources of money. He made it clear that if she left, she would leave with nothing, and his secret weapon was the recording of her infidelity with the office employee. This was the scenario at the beginning of 2003, and of course, the tensions between the couple affected the children, whose behavior went from bad to worse. Even Tiffany spent the holidays grounded because she and a friend had started a fire on school grounds. The end of the arguments came on Thursday, April 17, 2003, when John and Judy went out to dinner alone at a restaurant, possibly trying to find a solution to their situation, or maybe just trying to tone down the confrontation. After dinner, they called home to check on the kids and announced they would return shortly. At that moment, Christina asked them to stop by the office because she had left a school notebook there. Leaving the restaurant, they headed to the company, and John took the opportunity to bring the leftover dinner to Jeff, who was supposedly working late. The couple arrived at the office in a deserted industrial area just before 10 p.m. Both entered the office while John talked to Jeff. Judy picked up her daughter's notebook and returned to the car parked outside. Minutes later, John came out of the office and opened the rear door on the driver's side to search for something in the vehicle, when suddenly two loud bangs were heard and John collapsed on the parking lot floor. Instantly, the 911 received calls from Judy and the other from Jeff. As routine in such cases, police and medical assistance units arrived at the scene within minutes. Unfortunately, John, 33 years old, had been shot in the back of the head and was declared dead on the scene. Upon interrogating Judy, who was inside the car at the time of the incident, the woman could practically contribute nothing. She stated she was sitting there when her husband came out of the office, opened the back door on the driver's side, and immediately heard two detonations. Judy recounted that her reaction to hearing the shots was to hide, protecting herself with the seat, and when she lifted her head, she only managed to glimpse what seemed to be a man in dark clothing running away from the car. John's wallet was missing, so at first glance, the incident seemed to have been a robbery. But the more the scene was analyzed, the more doubts arose in the investigators' minds. No one besides the couple knew they were going to be there, so a series of questions were formulated. Why would someone be looking to commit a random robbery in an industrial area that had no people in circulation at night? If it had been a robbery, why did they first take his life and only then stripped him of his wallet when in plain sight? John was wearing a $20,000 gold Rolex and other easily accessible jewelry. Why hadn't the thief searched the pockets as criminals usually do in these kinds of assaults? More questions than answers. 2 bullet casings were found at the scene of the attack. This matched Judy's account of hearing 2 detonations. One of the shots ended John's life almost immediately, and as for the other, there was no official information. With their heads full of questions, the investigators began their work, and of course, the first person they took a statement from was Judy. She claimed that sometime before, her husband had had a heated argument with an employee of his company and identified the man. Beyond this, Judy could not provide anything more of interest beyond what she had said at the scene of the incident. Jeff was also not helpful. He was inside the office, and when he came out upon hearing the detonations, everything was already over. Meanwhile, the authorities contacted the Parker residence, and the call was answered by Christina, who was informed that her stepfather had passed away. With the robbery motive almost ruled out, detectives turned their focus towards John's circle, starting with the allegedly resentful employee. The man confirmed they had a significant argument but said it had been amicably resolved. Moreover, he had an alibi that was investigated and verified. The investigation then expanded to nearly everyone close to the young businessman: business partners, past and current employees, competitors, and even John's friends and family. The only slightly suspicious finding was the interaction between the widow and the company's general manager, but there was no substantial evidence. Judy's demeanor during her husband's funeral was very intriguing. Comments mentioned Judy appearing cheerful and socializing with friends, in stark contrast to the expected mourning behavior. Her ex-husband, the father of her 2 children, was also noted to be comfortably reading a newspaper at the funeral. 4 days after John's murder, Daniel, 15, was brought in for questioning on suspicion of involvement. This suspicion was based on an incident 6 months prior, where police were alerted by gang members that Daniel had paid them to kill his stepfather, John. Although they said they never intended to follow through and had merely kept the money, the police deemed the story implausible, confiscating the money and filing a report without apparent further action. However, given John's eventual murder, investigators revisited Daniel's potential involvement. Under interrogation, Daniel confessed to paying individuals to harm John, intending not to kill but to injure him, like breaking his legs. Despite detaining one of the youth Daniel allegedly negotiated with, he was released due to a solid alibi verified by the investigation. Daniel was released after 9 days due to lack of substantial evidence and his minor status. Later, it was revealed that John had issues with Judy's children, leading to more investigation into Daniel and bringing to light suspicions about Judy's daughter, Christina, 17. Christina denied everything when questioned, and like before, the alleged plan led nowhere. Given that both teenagers had shown a desire to eliminate John, investigators wondered where the money for these schemes was coming from, suspecting Judy as the only possible source. Further inquiries revealed that the relationship between the couple had significantly deteriorated prior to John's death, with at least one of Judy's affairs coming to light. However, sources indicated that John had no intention of leaving his wife and was seeking ways to salvage the relationship. The primary motive for Judy to target her husband appeared to be financial, with detectives discovering John had 2 life insurance policies totaling $1 million. Judy had attempted to claim this money after her husband's death, but the insurance company initially refused to pay, citing the ongoing investigation into his death. The payment was further complicated by John's father, who suspected Judy's involvement in his son's demise. Despite these leads, the case eventually stalled, with only circumstantial evidence available. Life moved on, but significant changes occurred within the Parker family household. Judy was hardly ever home, apparently busy with her new partner, Jeff, John's trusted manager. In her absence, The older siblings took care of their younger half-sisters, Tiffany and Erica. Months later, Judy and Jeff decided to move out of state with John's younger daughters, while Daniel went to live with his biological father. Christina remained in the house, now pregnant and with a boyfriend. Though the investigation had hit a dead end, authorities kept the case open, regularly revisiting the files in hopes of finding something substantial. Their persistence paid off when, following a new lead, they interrogated some schoolmates of Christina and Daniel, who admitted to selling them a firearm. This information led detectives to investigate a piece of family-owned land used by Christina for shooting practice. Upon inspecting the area, investigators indeed found several bullet casings. These findings were analyzed in laboratories, and a significant clue was discovered. The bullet casings matched those from John's crime scene. In 2007, additional information emerged through a colleague, a narcotics officer who had been tracking Christina's ex-boyfriend, involved in a drug case and arrested. Seeking leniency in his case, the ex-boyfriend disclosed a conversation with Judy, in which she mentioned that it was her son Daniel who had fired the shot that ended John's life. Confronted with this information, 21-year-old Christina, linked to the weapon used in the crime, quickly began to talk. She admitted to purchasing the weapon and calling her parents on the night of the incident, asking them to stop by the office under the pretense of picking up forgotten homework. She confessed to being part of a plan to kill John, with her brother Daniel designated as the shooter. When 19-year-old Daniel was located and detained in Arizona, he was presented with the new ballistics evidence and his sister's account. He readily admitted to being the one who shot John, but claimed that Judy, their mother, was the mastermind behind the plot. Daniel disclosed that Judy had forged company checks to gather the necessary funds to hire hitmen to kill John. The amount stolen was reportedly $7,500. However, when the initial plan fell through because the hired individuals took the money without completing the job, Judy allegedly instructed them to purchase the weapon for her son to use instead. Furthermore, Daniel revealed it was Judy's idea to create the pretext for leaving the house that night by making the call about the homework. He stated he shot John once in the head, and the second shot was an accidental discharge while he was rifling through John's pocket for his wallet, following his mother's instructions. He was also told to return home without alerting his younger sisters, a task facilitated by Christina, who kept the girls occupied with television. The siblings claimed their mother had convinced them to commit the crime by alleging they were victims of abuse by John and promising them a better life with more money and freedom. It was also revealed that this was not Judy's first attempt to kill her husband. She had previously tried to poison his food, leading only to a brief hospitalization for John under the guise of food poisoning. By the end of 2007, Christina and Daniel were formally charged with murder and conspiracy. Christina pleaded not guilty to the conspiracy charge and was released on bail several months later in March 2008. Daniel, then 20 years old, pleaded guilty to a conspiracy charge to kill his stepfather and made a deal to admit his guilt and implicate his mother in the crime. In exchange for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to charge him with the more serious offense of murder, although he would still face a sentence of 20 to 25 years in prison. Daniel claimed that nearly a year before the incident, when he was 14, his mother and sister first asked him to help kill John. He detailed that his mother gave him and his sister money to buy a pistol, as well as providing him with black clothing, gloves, and a mask to wear on the day of the crime. She also instructed him on what to do to carry out the grim task, including taking a thorough shower upon returning home to eliminate any traces of gunpowder. Ultimately, Judy took responsibility for disposing of the weapon, the clothes worn during the crime, and her husband's wallet. Facing the inevitable in July 2009, 6 years after her husband's death, Judy surrendered to the authorities and agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, acknowledging her role in planning, executing, and covering up the crime. The prosecution requested that she be sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 28 years and a maximum of 35 years. Judy, nearing 40, was sentenced to 33 years in prison in late August 2009. The following month, Daniel was sentenced to 23 years, and in early October, Christina, who eventually pleaded guilty to aiding a criminal, received a 5-year sentence. Press reports indicate that Daniel was released in 2017 after participating in a community transition court program and chose to live a low-profile life thereafter. Christina served 4 years of her sentence and was released in 2013, but tragically, she died from a drug overdose shortly after her release. This case is marked by greed. Despite Judy's difficult early life and later success, her insatiable desire for more led her to commit heinous crimes. Sadly, her actions not only destroyed a successful entrepreneur, but also profoundly impacted her 4 children, leading 2 to prison and leaving the younger ones without their father and mother. Aaron was born on July 15, 1994, in the United States to unknown parents. Fortunately, she was adopted by Lore and William, a couple from Tennessee. They had 7 children in total, with 5 of them being adopted, including Aaron. For Lore and William, adopting was more than a decision. It was about following a divine command to help those in need, especially since some of their adopted children had special needs. For instance, their youngest, Trisha, was born with multiple birth defects. From early childhood, while growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Aaron showed a remarkable and unconditional love for animals. Her mother cherished memories of Aaron being the only one who could make a rabbit walk on a leash as if it were a dog. Kind-hearted and gentle, Aaron enjoyed the benefits of having a loving and united family, facing only the usual challenges of any average household. When Trisha passed away at just 3.5 years old, Lore and William helped their grieving children understand the importance of having provided a happy life for her. Over time, Aaron turned her affinity for animals into a special talent for taming horses that no one else could tame. She had a pony named Riley at a stable near her home. In 5th grade, she met Jonathan Corwin, a boy a year older than her. Initially, they were not particularly close, but about 5 years later, they started chatting on social media. By then, Aaron's protective nature had led her to become the mother of dozens of animals, ranging from fish and guinea pigs to dogs and cats, all of whom she welcomed and cared for. Eventually, Jonathan plucked up the courage to ask her out, choosing her 16th birthday for the date. With her parents' permission, their love blossomed. Their romance, full of poem exchanges and shared dreams, turned them into the quintessential American couple. After finishing high school, Aaron found employment at a local tractor supply company, spending her free time with her horse or scouring garage sales with her mother and siblings. Meanwhile, Jonathan joined the Marine Infantry, and without hesitation about their bright future, they married in Las Vegas in November 2012. The following year, Jonathan learned he would be transferred to California. While the prospect excited both him and Aaron, they planned to return to East Tennessee as soon as possible. In September 2013, the newlyweds moved to their new home at the Marine Base in San Bernardino County. In turn, the location served as one of the entry points to Joshua Tree National Park. Here, they met new people, such as the couple Connor and Aisling Maliki, who live with their young son Brian on the ground floor of the same block as Aaron and her husband. Amid daily tasks, Jonathan also struck up a friendship with another colleague, Christopher Brandon Lee. Son of Karen Lee and hailing from Anchorage, Alaska, Christopher was a Marine who had been going through tough times after returning from a tour in Afghanistan. He lived on the base with his wife Nicole and their 6-year-old daughter Liberty. Like Aaron, the couple shared a love for horses. Soon, the three couples became friends. While their husbands were on duty, Aaron, Aisling, and Nicole would visit each other to have lunch and chat. When Jonathan, Connor, and Christopher were at home, they would cook or watch movies and TV shows in any of their apartments. It seemed like each home was everyone's home. Additionally, Christopher and his wife Nicole became horse sponsors at the Roca Blanca Ranch, which also hosted a non-profit organization dedicated to animal care and protection. Isabel Megley owned the site. Naturally, upon learning about it, Aaron joined the initiative. Amid their military duties, everything seemed to go smoothly. Initially, Christopher seemed to fit well with the uniform, but over time, other Marines noticed he often displayed a mix of disorder and insolence in handling weapons. An officer later reprimanded him for treating rifles and rocket launchers as if they were toys, earning Christopher a reputation for being reckless. For the Corwins, everyday life, far from their respective families, presented challenges that strained their relationship beyond the honeymoon phase. Their youth also meant they were not fully prepared for the challenges of marriage, often arguing over money and accusing each other of overspending. However, when Aaron became pregnant, all disagreements and bitterness between her and Jonathan dissolved. She was so happy with the news that she announced it with a blue and pink post on her social media profile. Unfortunately, just a few weeks later, Aaron suffered a miscarriage, which devastated her emotionally. To make matters worse, Jonathan's frequent deployments for military exercises far from the base added physical and emotional distance, as she felt he was unable to console her. Consequently, the cracks in their marriage not only reappeared, but also deepened. During the free time they shared, Christopher had been watching Aaron and found it easy to discern the depth of sadness on her face. From that moment, he began spending more time with Aaron without Nicole around. On a Sunday night in February 2014, the Lees joined the Corwins in their apartment. Jonathan and Nicole chose to watch a zombie series episode, but Aaron, put off by the violence, declined to join. Instead of staying with his wife, Christopher went with Aaron to the master bedroom to play video games. Alone, sitting side by side on the floor, they spent a few minutes in front of the screen until one of them paused the game and they looked at each other. Suddenly, they shared their first kiss. Although it lasted only a moment, that intimate gesture changed everything, and they began an affair that quickly escalated in intensity. Soon, Aaron and Christopher were talking about leaving their spouses and how great a stepmother she would be to Liberty, whom she frequently cared for. Meanwhile, Nicole sensed her husband's growing distance and soon checked his cell phone, discovering the text messages between Christopher and Aaron. Nicole was furious and confronted Christopher with a monologue filled with bitter words that lasted for hours. She didn't stop there, though. She also informed Jonathan about the affair, causing a heated confrontation that lasted through the night. When Aaron tried to leave, Nicole, eyes blazing with rage, screamed threats at her. Aaron and Christopher ended their affair, but weeks later, they resumed their secret meetings. Around this time, Christopher wrote Aaron a poem, urging her not to give up. Meanwhile, unaware of the ongoing betrayal, Jonathan was determined to make his marriage work. Then, on June 22, 2014, as Aaron anxiously awaited her mother's first visit to California, she discovered she was pregnant again, this time undoubtedly with Christopher's child. Though she didn't announce it on social media, she told him, Initially, Christopher feigned happiness, but in reality he was displeased, fearing the news could disrupt his plans. Despite promising a future together to Aaron, Christopher had no intention of leaving his wife and was greatly fearful of Nicole's potential reaction to the pregnancy. His time in the Marines was nearing its end. On July 4th, 2014, he was scheduled to finish his service and then planned to return to Alaska with his wife, leaving behind the tumultuous affair. The next day, Christopher told Isabel that he had been exploring the desert and was thrilled about the interesting things he had found, particularly excited about discovering a hard-to-reach mine shaft. He then asked to borrow a white propane tank that she owned. Isabel had no objections. Meanwhile, he started researching online how to dispose of a body. Then, he messaged Aaron to invite her for a surprise romantic evening in the national park. Filled with excitement, Aaron immediately texted a friend in Tennessee to share the news. They speculated about the true intentions of her lover and the mention of a surprise element. When her friend sent a text with a ring emoji, Aaron admitted she was excited about the possibility of a marriage proposal. The date was set for June 28th. Christopher told his wife he had planned a coyote hunting trip in Joshua Tree National Park with Connor, which conveniently allowed him to take his Winchester .22 caliber rifle. Early that day, he also loaded up the propane tank and gasoline. Before leaving, he mentioned to Nicole that Connor had canceled so he would go alone. Around 7:30 that morning, Aaron told Jonathan she was heading to Joshua Tree National Park to explore the trails that she and her mother could later bike on. She kissed him goodbye and said she loved him, leading her husband to believe that their life was returning to normal. Once at the meeting point, Aaron faced a harsh disillusionment. Not only was there no dream marriage proposal, but Christopher also made it clear that he had no affection for her whatsoever. She was confronted with a man consumed by anger, with her as the target of his rage. What happened next is largely known only to him, but it is known that he fired shots into the air before using a rope tied to 2 reinforcement bars to strangle Aaron, cutting off her air supply. After she fell to the ground, he checked her vital signs and, ensuring she was not breathing, threw her into the mine shaft he had discovered days earlier. Aaron fell 76 meters deep. As hours passed with no news from his wife, Jonathan became anxious. He tried calling her at least 50 times and eventually reported her missing the next morning. When the young soldier also contacted his mother-in-law, she suspected that her daughter, who always had trouble with directions, might have gotten lost in the vast national park. Several days passed with no information about Aaron's whereabouts. When new information finally emerged, it was far from reassuring. A woman living in a remote area noticed that a car had been parked near her house for several days, which was very unusual. She took pictures of the car and shared them, hoping the owner would appear. These photos turned out to be crucial, as it was discovered that the car belonged to Aaron. When the police informed Aaron's family that they had found her car abandoned several kilometers north of the park, she felt a stab in her heart. To her, it was almost a certain sign that her daughter had encountered something sinister. The police shared a similar sentiment. From that point, the authorities had 2 tasks, one more challenging than the other. The first task was to gather evidence to prosecute a potential attacker. In this regard, San Bernardino's detectives began to delve into Aaron's life and soon uncovered hidden aspects that might have endangered her. It was through their investigations that Jonathan learned his wife's affair had continued in secret. This detail quickly led the police to rule out the husband as a suspect. Instead, Christopher became the focus of their investigation, especially after tire tracks found near Aaron's car seemed to match his vehicle. Consequently, on July 1st, 2014, Christopher was interviewed by the police. By then, he had hidden his rifle at Isabel's ranch. Christopher initially apologized for not disclosing his relationship with Aaron, claiming their interactions had never crossed the boundaries set by their respective marriages. Then, unexpectedly, he claimed that Aaron had confided in him about being a victim of domestic abuse. Regarding the Saturday she disappeared, he admitted being in the national park area alone, ostensibly to hunt coyotes, hence firing his gun at rocks. However, the police confronted him with the evidence, leading Christopher to change his story. Without a body, the investigators could not pressure him further. At that point, there was no way to prove Aaron was deceased. So after 9 hours lacking sufficient evidence to charge him, the authorities had to let Christopher go. The police were convinced that the story provided by the main suspect was highly unusual and implausible. Later, when the detectives spoke with Nicole, they noted her uncooperative attitude, almost as if she resented the investigation. Christopher was eventually discharged from the Marine Corps, and as planned, he and his wife packed their bags, loaded their truck, and, along with Little Liberty, headed back to Alaska. Meanwhile, the police's second and more daunting task was to locate Aaron's remains and prove that this was not a mere case of spontaneous disappearance. The investigation seemed to stall, and the detectives were frustrated. Until Isabel remembered that the week before Aaron's disappearance, Christopher had mentioned going to the national park with a friend to explore mines, referencing one that nobody would find. Determined to follow this lead, they sought the help of a local expert, skilled and familiar with the scattered mines across the terrain. Guided by this expert, the investigators and volunteers in California began a meticulous search for Aaron in the park. They covered 3,000 square kilometers of wilderness, with 6 different law enforcement agencies eventually getting involved. However, after several weeks of searching, there were no favorable results, leading to the difficult decision to end the operation on Saturday, August 16, 2014. Yet, in a surprising twist of fate on that day, a spelunker noticed a strong smell of gasoline coming from one of the mines. In the final hours of that day, volunteers lowered a bucket with a camera into the mine. At 9 meters down, the oxygen level in the pit was toxic, and further down, near 30 meters, they discovered what appeared to be a body. After a tremendous effort in the late hours of that Saturday in August, the body was retrieved, 2 months after Aaron's disappearance. A propane tank was also found at the bottom of the mine, believed to be part of a failed attempt to destroy the victim's body. The remains were airlifted to the local morgue, where, due to advanced decomposition, dental records were used for identification. It was confirmed to be Aaron, who had died from asphyxiation caused by an object still clutched around her neck. Additionally, it was revealed that she was pregnant. The shocking discovery that Aaron and her unborn child had been killed sent her family on an emotional roller coaster. Though it was the worst possible news, for her mother at least, it was more bearable than the ongoing uncertainty of not knowing her whereabouts. For now, her mother only hoped that her daughter's body would be returned to Tennessee for a proper burial. With Christopher having the motive, means, an opportunity, and evidence piling up against him, he was soon arrested by a police officer in Anchorage, and his vehicle was confiscated. Inside the car, beneath the passenger seat, authorities found a homemade object similar to the one found around Aaron's neck. This led the police to interview Christopher's mother. Although she knew nothing about the item and claimed never to have seen it, a search of her home later uncovered a magazine edition featuring an article on Aaron's case. Following Christopher's arrest, the case attracted national media attention. Shortly after, the San Bernardino's police held a press conference to provide details on the case. They mentioned that Christopher was the main suspect in the crime. They also searched Isabel's ranch to her utter astonishment, where they found and seized a rifle owned by Christopher. Further complicating his situation, investigators discovered incriminating search histories on his internet activity. Consequently, Christopher was charged with first-degree murder. On Friday, September 19, 2014, hundreds of candles flickered in silent memory and tribute to Aaron and the unborn child whose life was cut short. Approximately 250 people attended the vigil, many wearing special T-shirts with Aaron's name on the front and a Bible verse on the back. During this time, Jonathan agreed to speak with only one media outlet among the many seeking his comment. In an interview, he expressed his hatred for Christopher's actions, but stated he felt that harboring hatred every time he saw him would eventually consume him. Jonathan revealed that he had learned about the rekindled affair and that his wife disappeared when she went to see Christopher, who was still his next-door neighbor. Part of him wanted to confront Christopher violently, but he refrained, believing it would make him no better than Christopher. Jonathan did not want to be a bad person. The legal process for obtaining justice for Aaron Corwin began 2 years later in October 2016. From the outset of the trial against Christopher, the prosecution easily established his penchant for violence and his motive and opportunity to commit the crime. On Wednesday, October 19th, a forensic scientist testified that a .22 caliber bullet casing was found near the mine where Aaron's body was discovered, and the firing pin marks on the casing matched Christopher's gun. When it was the defense's turn, Christopher was presented as the sole witness. He took the stand and, despite confirming all evidence against him, confessed to killing Aaron. However, he then offered a narrative of the events that was clearly not only false but also desperate. He claimed he had suspected that Aaron had abused his daughter while caring for her, leading to a so-called revelation on that fateful Saturday in the desert. In light of his narrative, Christopher believed he had ample justification for his actions, clearly hoping that his macabre story would result in a lesser sentence. Throughout the trial, he maintained a demeanor of cooperation and calmness. However, the jury did not believe a single word of his account. After just 15 minutes of deliberation, Christopher Brandon Lee was found guilty of first-degree murder. The following month, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In response to the tragedy, Aaron's family and some civic groups advocated for a petition to the Bureau of Land Management, urging them to provide funding and resources to seal abandoned vertical mine shafts, starting with the one where Aaron Corwin perished. Recognizing the enormity of the task and acknowledging that some public areas had already been closed, they requested prioritization for this particular area to prevent similar tragedies from affecting other families. Reflecting on the entire ordeal and the relief of reaching a conclusive verdict, Aaron's mother admitted feeling emotionally and physically drained by the end of the sentencing hearing. She had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for over 2 years, with her grief so heavy that she could barely walk. Yet, following the verdict and sentencing, she felt an immense burden lifted off her shoulders, likening her emotional response to the day she finally adopted Aaron. She described years of uncertainty in the adoption process and how all the stress vanished the moment she gave Aaron her last name, mirroring her relief upon hearing Christopher's sentence. As for Jonathan Corwin, Aaron's husband, he chose to shield himself from media overexposure and was taking steps to rebuild his life after the tragic loss. In the mid-1990s in Spain, 2 young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied societal expectations by getting married before reaching legal adulthood. For them and their community, navigating life was already a complex affair. The Romani people, officially termed by the European Union, have been part of Europe for nearly a millennium. As it stands, they are Europe's most significant ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million. Despite their population size, the Romani continue to face severe challenges, from school segregation and forced relocations to being marginalized into ghettos. They also struggle with restricted employment prospects solely based on their heritage and limited access to healthcare and other essential public services. So far, no resolution from the European Union's governing bodies has managed to effectively address these issues. Yet, despite facing all these adversities, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and chose to build a life together. Adding another layer of uniqueness to their story, especially from a Western perspective, is the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata had a unique dual relationship with Rosa, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, as well as the matriarch to the 4 other children. In the Romani community from which they hailed, there was a strong focus on keeping unions within the family to preserve their cultural heritage and lineage. Such unions were prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, often referred to as payos. At the tender age of 15, Rosa and Marcelino embarked on the journey of family life. Their first son, Adolfo, arrived swiftly and was marked by his quintessential Romani features, dark skin and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately dubbed him Diablo Moreno, or a dark-skinned devil. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan was born. Unlike his brother, he had lighter skin, which made him appear more like a payo. His blue eyes were as luminous as sunlight dancing on the sea, and his unruly blonde locks earned him the lifelong nickname Chucky, reminiscent of the messy-haired doll from the notorious 90s horror movie. The young family shared a humble abode with Immaculata, a small 2-room wooden house lacking doors, situated in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This settlement was predominantly composed of extended family members who relied on collective support to navigate their persistent financial struggles. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, was an established Romani clan. They had transitioned from agricultural labor to scavenging and selling an assortment of inexpensive goods, from garlic to brass, in a bid to make ends meet. Amid this backdrop of hardship, Rosa and Marcelino received news that they were expecting a 3rd child when Jonathan was still an infant. Their joy, however, was tragically short-lived. On the fateful morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, then only 19 years old, died tragically. He was riding in the back seat of a car that crashed at a speed of 200 km/h on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Shortly after the tragic loss of Marcelino, Rosa gave birth to a daughter whom she named Carmen. Unfortunately, Marcelino was no longer around to hold her in his arms, leaving Rosa as another young Romani mother facing the challenges of raising her children alone. This was the reality for many impoverished Romani families. They neither controlled lucrative antique markets nor were involved in large drug trafficking operations. Along the way, they had also lost the traditional skill of basket weaving, which once provided extra income. Long gone were the days of field work. They had moved to the city to scrape a living from scavenging. Despite these challenges, they aimed to remain united and uphold the traditions that made them feel at home, no matter where they were. Life moved on for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, past 2 p.m. in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares, Marcelino's birthday was being commemorated. He would have turned 21 that day had he not died in a car accident 2 years prior. As per Romani custom, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered. To mark the occasion, many in the community visited the cemetery to lay flowers and pay their respects. In Romani culture, The life of a departed loved one is celebrated as well as the life that could have been, no matter how short. On that day, children were running around and playing after having finished their meals. The adults were split between various tasks. Some were scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and some had gone to the cemetery for Marcelino's birthday. Among the group of children, all of whom were cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By that time, he was already 2 years and 8 months old. Jonathan was an energetic and spirited little boy. On that particular day, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was looking after him. She took him and a few of his young cousins to a nearby shopping mall called Prica for an outing. They strolled around for a while, enjoying some sweets before opting to capture the moment in a photo booth. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Isabel, upon collecting the booth's photographs, discovered that Jonathan was missing. In a state of alarm, she combed through the Prica Mall, repeatedly entering and exiting, all the while shouting Jonathan's name. Seeing no trace of him, she raced back to their community to rally the family. By the evening, after formally reporting his disappearance to the police, national authorities joined the search efforts, with firefighters getting involved the following morning. Realizing the gravity of the missing child situation, no one took the matter lightly. Even tracking dogs were deployed, but they yielded no clues regarding Jonathan's whereabouts. Officials soon dismissed the idea that Jonathan had simply wandered off and gotten stuck in nearby natural areas or construction debris. Specifically, the under-construction M45 highway, located not far from their settlement, was examined but ruled out as a location where Jonathan might have been. The next day, both print and TV news featured the unsettling story of a Romani child kidnapped in broad daylight from a mall. The news stunned and worried the public, highlighting the urgency and seriousness of the situation. The community and authorities continued their search, hoping for any lead that could bring Jonathan back to his family. In reaction, both Rosa's and Marcelino's families invoked their deep-rooted communal bonds, managing to gather over 200 Romani individuals from various cities like Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. Day and night, they combed the areas around Madrid. Although financial resources were limited, they created and posted makeshift flyers at gas stations in the vicinity, but all efforts were in vain. As hours turned into days, desperation escalated. Investigators revisited Prica, the scene of Jonathan's disappearance, and reviewed the available security footage, which unfortunately did not offer any insights due to its outdated technology. A woman who claimed to have been at the mall on that fateful Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark man giving a child, who resembled Jonathan, a bag of sweets before leading him to a children's ride. She later saw them at a cafe, where the man had a beer before departing with the child. However, her account could not be verified. The chief investigator assured everyone that they were treating the case as a high priority and even initiated an international alert via Interpol. Accompanying Jonathan's picture, they provided his description: blue eyes, blonde hair, approximately 3.3 feet tall, around 55 pounds, with milk teeth, dressed in a blue one-piece suit. With no stone left unturned, his family blanketed Madrid with posters featuring Jonathan's image and a contact number. Unfortunately, the numerous calls received were not all sincere or helpful. Numerous theories were considered, yet none provided answers. The concept of abduction became increasingly likely both within the family and from a law enforcement standpoint. One avenue explored was a potential clash between different Romani families. Authorities questioned countless individuals, and the regional government representative at the time, Francisco Xavier Anzurtegui, consulted with heads of Romani families in Madrid. All claimed ignorance about the young boy's disappearance, insisting he wasn't in the hands of any clan. Financial motives were also scrutinized. The family revealed they were awaiting a large insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000 following Marcelino's death, making it conceivable that someone aimed to claim the money. The family was plagued by anomalous phone calls from a hoarse-voiced man asserting he had Jonathan, yet no demands were made. While police pursued this lead, it yielded no results. Disturbingly, other calls came in featuring the sounds of a child crying, heightening the family's anguish. These calls were later traced back to a psychologically unstable woman who used a doll to simulate the cries. As days passed with no ransom request, the likelihood of a kidnapping for financial reasons waned. After 2 torturous weeks, Jonathan's location remained a mystery. During this period, the non-stop ringing of the household phone escalated their emotional turmoil. Calls came from inquisitive journalists or individuals offering moral support, but no concrete help. Jonathan remained headline news, yet this offered no advantage in finding him. Immaculata, a grandmother of 38, epitomized the challenges faced by the poor Romani community, enduring the heartache of the situation while striving to keep her family's spirits alive in the face of such adversity. Prematurely aged by years of hardship and now further diminished by grief, she nonetheless endeavored to support her niece, Rosa, a young widow with a child missing. Amidst this devastating situation, Rosa attempted to nurse her 15-month-old daughter, Carmen, who was too young to comprehend the tragedy unfolding around her. Rosa was eating poorly and seemed to be withering away from the inside. A report from the newspaper El País depicted their community, Las Castellanas, as a mud-filled hamlet dotted with makeshift dwellings. Home to 50 to 60 families and encircled by emaciated, unresponsive dogs, the settlement presented a bleak picture of life on the margins. In the summer of 2000, Rosa received the insurance settlement from Marcelino's untimely death. Although it brought some financial respite, the 14 million pesetas were less than they initially expected. Committed to finding her missing son, Rosa designated 7 million pesetas as a reward for information that could lead to Jonathan. She spent the remaining money on a van and countless flyers featuring Jonathan's image. Rosa also purchased additional phones to handle potential leads and, accompanied by relatives, began a relentless journey. They traveled throughout Spain and even crossed into France and Portugal in the hopes of locating Jonathan. Regrettably, the search only deepened their sense of loss and despair. At just 21 years old, Rosa pledged to continue the search for her son, even if it meant walking the entire country with only a cane to aid her. As days stretched into months, a grueling 6 months had passed when Rosa's hope for a family reunion was brutally dashed. One evening, while watching television, they heard a breaking news report. A truck driver had stumbled upon skeletal remains not far, about 1.5 kilometers away, from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the closeness, it was feared that the remains could be Jonathan's. The news stunned the tight-knit Romani community and extinguished any lingering hope that the boy would be found alive. Interestingly, the media stated that this particular area had supposedly been scoured in the initial frantic searches for Jonathan. The bones were located near the construction site of Madrid's EM45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to assess the site before unloading soil from the construction project. When he saw the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and reported his discovery, even as the soil was being dumped at that location. The police acted swiftly, using heavy machinery to unearth a fractured skull and a few ribs with no obvious marks of violence. Nearby, they discovered children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt, and a pair of shoes, all faded but intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother identified these garments as the clothes Jonathan was wearing when he disappeared. To the family, it became clear what had tragically occurred. The authorities advised them to wait for conclusive DNA test results for final verification. A week later, the family received confirmation that the discovered remains were indeed Jonathan's. Rosa, his mother, was so overwhelmed by the news that she had to be hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation brought a tragic closure to the long search, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality of their loss and the need to seek justice for Jonathan. The emotional toll of searching for her son for 6 months culminated in the heartbreaking discovery of his remains. Debate arose about whether the area where the remains were found had been adequately searched earlier. The local security official claimed that this particular stretch had been overlooked because it was beyond the expected radius of where Jonathan might be found. This discrepancy led to differing opinions among the community and authorities. Some thought the remains had been there all along, while others suspected they had been moved recently. A regular forager and the landowner of the area both stated they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Police refrained from speculating how the fragmented skull, lower jaw, and ribs ended up near the construction site. However, the regional governor suggested that the remains might have been brought there by the truck dumping soil for the construction. The family held fast to their belief that Jonathan was criminally taken, asserting that he would never have wandered off by himself. They clarified, however, that they didn't suspect anyone in particular, noting that if they had, they would have enacted their own form of justice in keeping with the Romani code of an eye for an eye. Clarity remained elusive in the case, and forensic analysis of the remains could not ascertain the cause of Jonathan's death. He was laid to rest in a modest white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 people, all grappling with the unresolved tragedy. Through it all, Rosa was visibly shattered, unable to stop her tears and suffering from multiple collapses. Although the case remains open, police have made no significant progress. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's death remain a mystery, lacking both justice and explanation.